Good evening, everybody. So before we begin with the agenda, can I advise of a few housekeeping issues, please? I'd like to remind all present that under the Council's remote meeting procedures, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for archive purposes on the Council's website. Can I ask members, except for Cabinet members and group leaders, to ensure your mics and cameras are turned off until you're invited by myself to speak. For the benefit of those joining online, could we please limit the use of the chat facility to ensure that all discussions take place in the meeting itself, unless, of course, you have audio or camera issues. Should you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand function in the Teams software and wait until invited to speak. And if the raise your hand function doesn't work for any reason, you can also raise your hand on camera. And I will invite people to speak in the order in which hands are raised. With regard to voting on recommendations, if there's no dissent, then I will accept silence as agreement to that recommendation. So let's start with item 1 of the agenda, apologies for absence. I understand we have apologies for Councillor Hanks, Councillor Lovelock Edwards and Councillor Cowp. Are there any other apologies, please? No, thank you. Moving on to item 2, roll call and declarations of interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. Can I invite the Chief Executive to take us through the roll call, please?
Yes, starting with Councillor Anne Asprey.
Hello.
Councillor Asprey, present. Okay.
Sorry, I'm here, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Julie Aviett.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Gareth Ball.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Rhiannon Birch.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Bronwyn Brooks.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Gillian Bruce.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Ian Buckley.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Liz Burnett.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Samantha Campbell.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor George Carroll.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Christine Cave. Councillor Cave, present.
Present, nothing to declare.
Thank you very much. Councillor Charles Champion.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Janice Charles.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Millie Collins.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Pamela Drake.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Vince Driscoll.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Anthony Ernest.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Robert Fisher.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Chris Franks.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Wendy Gilligan.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Russell Godfrey.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Emma Goodjohn.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Ewan Goodjohn.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Stephen Haines.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Howard Hamilton.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor William Hennessy.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Nick Hodges.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Mark Hooper.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Catherine Iannucci.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Gwyn John.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Ian Johnson.
Present, all I didn't be to that again.
Councillor Susan Lloyd Selby.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Julie Lynch Wilson.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Kevin Marney.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Naomi Marshalsea.
Yn bresennol a dim byd i'w ddatgan.
Councillor Michael Morgan.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Jane Norman.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Helen Payne.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Elliot Penn.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Sandra Perks.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Ian Perry.
I'm present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Joanna Prythrow.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Ruba Sivanianam.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Caris Dallard.
Yn bresennol a dim byd i'w ddatgan.
Councillor Neil Thomas.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Rhys Thomas.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Steffan William.
Bresennol a dim byd i'w ddatgan.
Councillor Margaret Wilkinson.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Eddie Williams.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Mark Wilson.
Present and nothing to declare.
And Councillor Nicholas Wood.
Present and nothing to declare.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you, Chief Executive. So we move on to item 3 to approve the minutes of previous meetings, and I'll take these one by one. Meeting held on the 25th of April 2022.
I move those as a true and accurate record, Mayor.
Second that, Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on, the annual meeting held on the 23rd of May 2022.
If I could move those, Mayor.
And I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you. Both sets of minutes are approved. Moving on to item 4, announcements. I'll just if I may, just by updating colleagues on things I've been involved in since being elected as Mayor. So since my election as Mayor, I've attended 17 events. You'll no doubt be glad to hear that I'm not going to talk about them all this evening. There is now a monthly mayoral update on the council's Facebook page, which provides a summary of the events that I'm attending. So do please take a look at that if you're interested in finding out more. I would like to highlight what a huge privilege it's been to mark the service of our armed forces and veterans on Falklands Memorial Day, Armed Forces Day, as well as seafarers at the Barry Sea Service Day. It was also a particular pleasure to renew ties with delegates from Fécamp and Moucron, our twin towns, and to celebrate Polish Heritage Day at the Senedd. Our ties with friends in Europe are more important than ever at this time. And I was delighted to support a number of events which highlight the wonderful work being done by volunteers across the Vale, supported by the Vale Council, including the opening of the new activity room in Roos Community Library, the annual Scout and Guide Fete, and the opening of the refurbished tennis courts in Romley Park. Next month, I'm looking forward to supporting the Barry Island 10K. There'll be 10 people running in support of the Mayor's Foundation. I hasten to add, I will not be one of them, but I'm grateful to all those who will be running. The Mayor's Foundation is now open for funding applications. Details can be found on the Council's website. So do please let community groups and organisations know about that so they can consider whether or not they'd like to make an application. Moving on, I invite the leader, Councillor Liv Burnett, to make any announcements.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to provide an update on the cost of living payments made by this council. As a result of the Welsh Government support package of £177 million to assist households across Wales with the cost of living crisis, this council received an amount of £5,014,200 for payments under the main scheme. The final guidance was received from Welsh Government on the 23rd of March 2022. The council identified approximately 32,850 households who would be eligible for the 150 cost of living payment, and in just 6 weeks from receipt of the Welsh Government guidance, the council had already paid almost 52% of households who were entitled to the payment. All eligible households have now been sent a letter advising them how to claim their cost of living payment, and to date 28,435, that's 87%, have received the payment, meaning that a total of £4,265,250 has been distributed to help local residents. Council staff have worked tirelessly to ensure that customers have been able to claim their cost of living payment, and I would urge those that have not responded to the letter to submit their application as soon as possible. Anyone who's not responded or has not received the initial letter will receive a reminder at the end of the month advising them of the procedure to follow in order to claim the payment. Additional information is available on the council's website on the cost of living support page, and work is also progressing on the distribution of the discretionary cost of living scheme. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Chief Executive, do you have any announcements for us? No. Then moving on to item 5, we've received a notice of motion submitted by councillors GDD Carroll, RE Godfrey and RR Thomas.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I beg to move the motion in my name and that of councillors Russell Godfrey and Rhys Thomas. Madam Mayor, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we work in many ways, and it's brought many benefits to changes in our working patterns. And at first instance, Madam Mayor, I'd like to set out the benefits that I think that remote meetings can bring in certain circumstances.
Councillor Carroll, forgive me, please forgive me the intrusion while you're speaking. I'm not aware that the motion before us has been seconded.
Second, Madam Mayor, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. Forgive me, Councillor Carroll, please do continue.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought many changes to our working patterns, and indeed remote meetings and meeting virtually has in many circumstances been beneficial, and I'm the first to say that myself. However, there are certain circumstances in which it is much more preferable for us to meet face to face, for various reasons, including the added scrutiny that face-to-face interaction can bring, the level of debate that face-to-face action provides to us, and the overall improvements in decision-making processes. And for these reasons, Madam Mayor, I welcome the moves that several councils have made towards hybrid meetings, whereby councillors have the option of either sitting in the meeting in person or taking part virtually. I know many members of the public and indeed members of this authority would take perhaps a more hardline view than that and say that everybody should be sat in the chamber, but I accept that Welsh Government legislation means that the hybrid option has to be available, so I don't think there's any point moving to another item, moving the debate in that direction. Other councils across Wales, Madam Mayor, have already moved to the hybrid model, but it's a matter of regret that we're still meeting like this virtually. I think we've seen in previous council meetings of both committees and indeed of full council the problems that technical issues can provide, the fact that it's a lot harder for members of the public to view how certain members are voting, the difficulties that members of the public can have not being able to be present in the public gallery. And so I think it's imperative that we move towards a hybrid model as soon as possible. Madam Mayor, I note that at item 7A on this agenda, there is an item in reference to this and a reference from Cabinet on the 25th of April. So I therefore hope that that signals progress from this authority in moving towards that motion. And if I may be a little mischievous, Madam Mayor, I think that perhaps this motion has at the very least pushed this council in that direction, but I would urge all members to support this motion and ensure that we can get to that hybrid model as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it would be worth starting out with the Welsh Government interim guidance, which does state that there's no requirement for each meeting to be held in the same way every time it meets. For example, the council could decide to hold some full council meetings entirely remotely and others as multi-location meetings, with a number of councillors present. Now, I noticed Councillor Carroll referred to the multi-location meetings policy, which was approved by full council on the 25th of April. That was well before this motion came into being, and I do believe that Councillor Carroll was actually at that meeting and did not speak or oppose against it. So clear that that was actually approved then on the 25th of April. Now, the Local Government and Elections Wales Act requires participants to join through remote means for all formal meetings. So the Act does not permit councils to decide that all meetings will be held entirely physically face-to-face.
Yeah, agree with that.
The Act does, yeah, I'm actually speaking, Councillor Carroll. And I think the second part of the motion, where it says, it does state that we recognise that in-person meetings allow for more effective scrutiny and decision-making than meetings that are held virtually. I'd like to bust that myth, because I think we've proven with the meetings that we hold on this council, surely with the sheer number that actually are able to join in remotely and take part in our meetings, will actually listen in. And I think we've proven that in-person meetings are not more effective than virtual meetings. And I think we've had that with the variety of, and the increase in actually the number of council questions that we've had from members of the public. And I welcome that, because to me that's diversity of engagement and about how many people can actually come into those meetings. At one time there was hardly ever a public question, and actually now we've got 7 on the agenda tonight. And I welcome those. And I think at other meetings, like planning meetings, I think there's been huge numbers actually coming in remotely to that. And I think that's really important, because the public have a presence then, just as our elected members do. They're not disadvantaged, and the only difference is actually that they weren't physically present to observe those meetings. And that makes that meeting completely transparent, as well as the fact that we actually, one of the few councils that live stream as many of our meetings as possible. And I think that is really important. So the public who are here now attending this meeting are actually listening in as we speak and make those decisions. And I think that's really important. When we talk about the hybrid meetings, yes, I absolutely welcome hybrid meetings. But there's quite a few councils which are not in that point in time as yet. There's lots of councils which are working towards that, as ours is, and I think that's really important. And actually, we've already held some hybrid meetings as well as full in-person meetings. So I think that is really important that we do that. But this council is already actively working towards the hybrid meetings, and I think a really important point around that is that there is Civico training that all members need to complete to actually be able to move onto that platform fully. Now that training has been available for members since the middle of May, and I am aware that there are a substantial number of members who have not yet undertaken that training. So I think for me it's about urging any members who haven't undertaken that training is that they do so as soon as they can, because actually this then will help us move on to the Civico platform, which will enable us to hold those hybrid meetings for all meetings. So I would just urge those members who haven't undertaken that training to please do that. So I'm afraid, Councillor Carroll, I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Birch, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I know many people wish to speak on this because it's a subject very close to many people's hearts. I think that having meetings where people are able to access them from home. I won't go into the talking about petrol and so forth and fuel and wastage and so forth. I know other people will speak on that more eloquently than I. But being able to participate from home means that people like me, who for years was the jam in a family sandwich with a mother who needed a lot of care, children and a grandchild, particularly one with special needs, meant that I'm able to participate from home and give my best because I am not bound up in travel. For people like me who live in Penarth, every meeting is an extra hour because of the driving to and from meetings that we have to do. And there are people in the Western Vale who are even more disadvantaged than that. I think that this is a subject that has been brought up several times in the last few weeks, and I think it interesting that predominantly it has been brought up and supported by men, who in our society rarely have the caring problems or difficulties or burdens that many women are expected to bear. Obviously, I'm not ruling out the fact that some men do this, but predominantly it is women. And if we are looking for a more diverse range of councillors, whether we're talking about age, gender, any other kind of characteristic that you're thinking of, it is important that we make meetings as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. This is something I feel very strongly about, so at this point I'm going to shut up.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Councillor Rees-Thomas, I'm going to bring you in now, but just to remind you that as a co-proposer of the motion, if you speak now, you won't have the opportunity to do that again in relation to this motion. So can I just check, do you want to speak at this point?
I'm happy to speak afterwards. Whenever I'm supposed to speak, I'm happy to do that.
Then we will move on to Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Lady Mayor. I also have to respectfully disagree with Councillors Carroll, Godfrey and Thomas. I don't recognise that in-person meetings will allow for more effective scrutiny and decision making. We can all be seen and heard today, and I don't think that, as has already been eloquently put by a number of speakers, that we need to be in the same room to make our contributions. And on the hottest day of the year and the hottest day on record, may I remind you of the absolute necessity and responsibility on us to lead by example and try and conduct our council meetings with the lowest impact on the environment by cutting our carbon emissions. Now, today, the UN Secretary General said at the Petersburg Climate Dialogue that no nation is immune, and yet we continue to feed our fossil fuel addictions. He said, and I know this sounds dramatic, but I really think this is a dramatic time, we have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. Now, we all have our part to play in this, and any reductions that we can make in future emissions will help reduce the magnitude of the heat waves. So I think the sooner we can achieve net zero, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Councillor Rees-Thomas, just to be clear, you are able to speak at any point in this debate that you want to. I'm just reminding you of the fact that you're only able to speak once on this motion. So can I check, would you like to come in at this point, or would you like to wait for a later point in the debate?
I'm happy to wait. Thank you for clarifying.
Well, whenever you put your hand up, Councillor Thomas, I will take you at that point. Thank you. So, Councillor Penn. Councillor Elliott Penn, did you wish to come in at this point?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to add my 2 penneth as a dad of 2 small children. Anything that makes it easier for councillors, lay members and observers to attend meetings should be thoroughly endorsed. The use of online meetings has improved participation and made it a lot easier for lots and lots of people to attend. I've been to many meetings, online meetings, where I haven't seen quite a lot of older participants for a very long time in person, but actually online they can join in. Mobility problems, it means that they can actually join in. I'm on Penarth Town Council and my partner Joe is on Landock Community Council. I mean, I've got Penarth Town Council on Thursday, she's got Landock Community Council on Thursday as well. So because we can join online, it means we can share the childcare, because we don't live in the 1950s and we have equal responsibilities for childcare. And it means we can actually perform our roles and look after our kids much better than if I had to travel down to Barry, or if Joe has to go down to the community hall for the community meeting. I'd like to see evidence of how it improves scrutiny and it improves debates, because from my experience, the meetings I've had online, the debate has been thorough and in depth. I think anything that improves our abilities to attend meetings should be embraced. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Penn. There is still a lot of hands. I'm conscious that lots of members want to speak on this issue, so we'll move on rapidly to Councillor Neil Thomas, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish I was surprised that the Conservative group would bring forward a motion such as this at this time, but sadly I'm not. Online meetings were introduced as a response to the COVID pandemic in order to keep business going when face-to-face meetings were seen as dangerous. The Conservatives seem to be acting as though COVID has gone away, when anyone who is paying attention to the science can clearly see that not only has it not gone away, but it is resurging. In Wales, 1 in 17 people has COVID now, and it's increasing across the world. Along with that, we're seeing yet another variant of concern emerging as we speak. And yet the Conservatives want us all to pack into a comparatively small space where, by the law of average, at least 3 of us will be COVID positive. I agree we need to get to normal business as soon as possible, but that shouldn't include encouraging people to ignore each other's safety, nor should normal mean returning to the old ways, but using new technology involves active participation and familiarity with the technology. It was hoped that COVID, like flu, would be a seasonal illness, but the evidence is becoming clear that it is a year-round endemic virus, extremely prone to mutation, and it's impossible to predict when a very virulent mutation might arise. Vaccines against some of the earlier variants have been effective against them and appear to have reduced the symptoms people have suffered from the newer variants. But they don't stop those new variants spreading, nor will they necessarily be effective against the next wave of variants, which is why new vaccines and further jabs are planned. This motion from the Conservatives is reckless populism that has no supporting science of any credibility, nor does it have a basis in a need for change. The attempts to distract from the real issues by members of their party in both Westminster and Cardiff Bay and now here are dangerous and misleading, sending a message that COVID is over. Like Brexit, it is far from over, nor will it be in the foreseeable future, as anyone who understands the science can explain. And to give that impression is to encourage wider and faster spread and more casualties and more pressure on the NHS. Anyone supporting this motion has clearly failed to understand the science, and for that reason, among many others, I oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I'll bring in Councillor Savignon next, please.
Thank you, Mayor. You won't be surprised to know that I'm going to speak against this motion. I'm hugely dismayed by this motion. Because on the one hand, Councillor Carroll seems to be complaining that, why haven't we had hybrid meetings, and this is terrible. But at the same time, he seeks to drag us back into prehistoric ages, or perhaps as Councillor Penn said, into the 1950s, by claiming that presenteeism somehow means that we're more accountable as a council, and that our scrutiny is somehow better because we're all in the same room. Well, I think the past couple of years have demonstrated that clearly isn't the case. So just 2 points, and these points have already been made, Mayor. So do forgive me. The first point, the online virtual meetings. It ensures that every member has access to our meetings and to the business of the council, and also members of the public, the people we represent. So I think it's really, important that we bear that in mind. And it wasn't long ago that those of us in this council who do support diversity and equality supported the declaration, the council's diverse council declaration. And the reason for supporting that is that we support the removing of barriers to people's access to democracy, and whether it's meetings, whether it's meeting elected members of the public, meeting elected members, and so on. And my second point really touches on what Councillor Brooks talked about in the beginning. We also, as a council, at the beginning of the year, in the spring, agreed a policy about multi-location, a multi-location policy, so that full council meetings, cabinet meetings, certain committee meetings would become hybrid in terms of when they met. So I really don't understand the purpose of this motion, because it's agreed we are going to have hybrid meetings. Once people have done training, that's exactly what we shall be doing. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Wilson, and then Councillor Emma Goodjohn, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And there's been some excellent points already made, and I will try and not duplicate those points. I think the first issue is there's an accusation of some people out there that all we're doing is lying in our bedrooms or our living rooms and not working. And I really resent that accusation. As a new cabinet member, I attend a huge amount of meetings, face-to-face, online, in various locations. But mostly I do think about what's the effectiveness of it. And if I think it's effective doing it from home, I will do it from home. And in many ways, it's effective for lots of people. Also, as you know, one of my roles is responsible for the roads. And yet many of you have moaned to me about the condition of the roads. Well, the condition of roads are largely brought on by people travelling. If we can reduce unnecessary travelling to meetings where we can do online if we want to, then I think all well and good. That certainly reduces the budgetary pressure upon the council. So I think that is one reason why perhaps we could reduce the amount of face-to-face meetings. And secondly, the accusation made was it reduced participation. Well, I can see on the queuing up after me speaking, there's 14 other people. I think there's at least half a dozen already spoken already. Now that's about 20 people. That's almost half the council who wants to speak in this debate. Now it indicates to me that using Teams or forms of platform like that, like Zoom, actually increases participation. I think some people get put off by kind of like, oh, let's all get together, let's be like Parliament and all rabble-rouse. Well, I don't want like that. I want everyone to have their individual say and speak according to what they really want to say and not be put off or overly encouraged to say something by other members. I think this is a way forward, as it were. I mean, we're much more respectful of each other this way, and I think it really works forwardly. And my final point is, okay, we are moving on to Civico. Civico will be the platform we use. We are doing trials at the moment. It will be a great platform to use, and people can choose whether they want to be in the chamber or out the chamber. That's what we're working towards. So I think the Conservatives have gone too fast in this motion, and I think I'm disappointed they've done it. Bearing in mind, we agreed this at the time prior to the last meeting. I think it's the last cabinet meeting we decided prior to the new council. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell, I am conscious we do have a lot of hands, so I appreciate the point made about brevity and about avoiding duplication wherever possible so that we can get through everybody who wants to speak, but also ensure we have the appropriate debate. So if I can bring in Councillor Campbell at this point, and then we will move on to Councillor Perry.
Hi, I actually agree with Councillor Carroll. I think that there seems to be, when people are speaking, I think people have kind of missed the point a little bit. He's not trying to drag us all into the council offices. He's just saying there should be the facility there to do it. Personally, I really suffered throughout the pandemic. My mental health was a bit of a mess, and just speaking to everybody now, I'm actually physically shaking. My voice is shaking because I can't actually conduct myself very well remotely. So I will take all meetings face to face. I feel like I can't talk properly in a meeting like this because I'm limiting myself. And I feel like that's a barrier to me to be able to do my job and communicate effectively with everyone else. I mean, there's 60 people on this meeting or so. That's very, very daunting. As somebody who's a new councillor as well, I don't feel like that's being taken into account. And I don't feel like mental health is being taken into account in regards to doing hybrid meetings.
Thank you for that contribution, Councillor Campbell, and forgive me, Councillor Perry, I am going to come to you, but I actually skipped over Councillor Emma Goodjohn. So if I can bring in Councillor Goodjohn first, and then Councillor Perry, I will come to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to say on the mental health issue that I find this easier to speak than a whole range of people. Seeing lots of faces in front of me in real time on a computer is probably easier, but to actually be in the chamber as a new councillor, I would find that quite challenging, and I find this easier for my mental health. Also, I think the amount of people to be able to attend the meetings, the more the better for the public to be represented well, and for the public to be involved in the meetings. There's also things like access to transport, people if they're ill themselves as well to be able to attend meetings, especially with COVID at the moment. If they've got COVID, to actually be able to attend online rather than face to face and pass on the illness. I think it's important for all sorts of. I echo all everybody else, of course, with caring commitments and disabled family members, disabilities themselves as well. Members of the public actually getting into the chamber with a disability, it could be near on impossible, and their voices should be heard in council meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience, Councillor Perry. Would you like to make your...
And the people behind me as well, yeah. Remote meetings are not new. I was doing remote meetings 20 odd years ago. Obviously, more people are doing them now in 2020, and the technology is far advanced to what we were doing back then. And important decisions were being taken by telephone meetings, sometimes by people in different countries. So huge different backgrounds, and yet it worked back then, and effective decision making was taken. So I don't see actually how us meeting in person would improve decision making. I think it's important that we actually do our homework before the meeting and read around the subject we're going to talk about. I think that would help, and sometimes that doesn't appear to be happening, and people come to meetings not fully prepared. So I think that's important. I think the conversation before this that people have said, it is really, really good. And I'm not going to name them because the roll call of everybody is really, really long. I think we need to apply the precautionary principle in terms of COVID. Obviously, we've all been told to stay home today because of the heat, and that's what we should be doing. But I do see the number of COVID cases rising dramatically. I saw a graph and it's back at where it was last April. There's lots of concern that we're so high at this time of the year, with our vaccination immunity going down. So I think we need to show a bit of leadership in our role. And I'll say that I'm probably one of the very few people, the 1%, who still wears a mask in supermarkets. I don't always wear a mask, but if it's in the car and I'm going to a supermarket, I will show a little bit of leadership, because I've got residents here who are afraid still to go out, and I'm not going to leave them behind. I'm not going to forget about them. I can still do my job. I'm still going out and meeting residents in the street or knocking on their doors. So I will obviously be voting strongly against the motion put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Payne, please.
Hi. I'm voting against the motion, for obvious reasons. One of them being, I don't know if you can see, broken wrist. So tonight I'm delighted that this is an online meeting, because I would have had great difficulty today getting to the meeting. So that's the primary thing. The other thing is, with due respect to Carol, Godfrey and Thomas, councillors, you're coming from a young white male perspective with no caring responsibilities. And I'd kind of go that you may be going a little bit Victorian on this. I'm a councillor, I'm the current mayor of Barry. I have caring responsibilities for my elderly parents who are 88 and 90. So I am delighted that I'm able to fit all of these things in and do my community role as well. I found the Civico training really easy, very, very easy indeed. And I think that the online atmosphere is informal, relaxed, I'm at home, and I think it actually adds to the debate, because I think people will speak who don't normally. The other part of it is, I have run online wellbeing groups from the very beginning, from week 1 of the pandemic, in a different role, and people have engaged more online, even without turning their cameras on, than they ever did in person. So I just want to make that point, that, you know, wellbeing is always considered, and I know that Democratic Services will always consider our wellbeing, and I'd like to commend them for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. We still have a lot of people who want to speak on this issue, so we'll move on to Councillor Haines next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for the delay. I'm trying to get the mic off. Yes, I'll be as brief as I can, but it's been one way, so I'd like to cover a couple of things. First off, I'm a bit concerned that members don't understand the motion. It definitely says hybrid meeting. It doesn't say meeting in the council chambers. And hybrid means you can either meet in the chambers and, if you prefer, meet remotely. So passing this motion won't affect your rights to meet online. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the barriers to people coming to meetings. People have said about disabled and people trying to get access. What about people who don't have good IT? Members of the public who want to see their councils in action, who don't have good IT or live in rural areas with poor IT, don't understand the IT. How are they going to see or experience what we're doing? And a case in point, I couldn't understand Councillor Brooks very well, because either my IT was going bad or Councillor Brooks's was when she was speaking. I would also like to say that I've had a couple of IT problems myself with meetings, which meant I've fallen out of the meetings and I've been unable to contribute. So I would like you to reconsider your positions, councillors, and try and support this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haines. Councillor Christine Cave, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, or Mayor. I agree with everything that the previous councillor has said. I think there's some confusion here about what the actual motion is. I think the motion is calling for hybrid meetings, and that's all about choice. And everybody that's spoken here has come forward with different elements of why they prefer one type of meeting over the other. But what we're actually calling for is choice, so that people can make informed decisions themselves about what is best for them, not based on anybody else's pre-requirements, but on their own pre-requirements. You know, I have to add that I also have IT problems, and I couldn't understand what Bronwyn Brooks was saying. You know, I had a meeting earlier last week where my IT failed just at a point where I was about to vote for something. I had to come out of the meeting. I had to rejoin the meeting. I actually had to reinstall Teams at one stage to understand what was going on. So out in the rural Vale, I think it's very difficult for me to always have to have a virtual meeting. And what the motion is calling for, which I'm in favour of, and which lots of people have already spoken about and said they're not in favour of, although they have given very good valid reasons why we should actually be meeting in a hybrid way. I would like to say, you know, everybody here today should be thinking about supporting this motion. It's calling for a hybrid meeting style by this council, and I'd like to say I fully support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cave. Councillor Janice Charles, please.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Haines and Councillor Cave for having to point out to those that have already spoken exactly what the motion is and what hybrid meeting actually says, that we do have choices. I would also like to say, if you bear with me 2 secs, sorry, I've lost sound. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Councillor Charles.
Thank
you.
I can understand the council wanting to vote remotely in the manner of trade unions and claim the support of every member, but this does not demonstrate to the public democracy in action in the council chamber like a show of hands, and I fully support people having a choice whether they actually go online or meet in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Can I just respectfully ask councillors who've already spoken on this motion if they could lower their hands? I would be really grateful, just to remind councillors that if you've spoken once on this motion, then you're not able to speak again. So we'll move on now to Councillor Perks, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, really, I mean, the last few councillors have actually stated that this isn't about people being present in the chamber. It's about people, you know, having the ability to be sort of hybrid meetings. But part of the motion actually states that somehow the being remote, you can't have effective scrutiny or effective meetings. So it's either one thing or the other. And I think that's what people are objecting to, is that this motion actually states that in-person meetings allow for more effective scrutiny and decision making. Now, that's either true or not. If it's a hybrid meeting, then you're still going to have the same issue. You're either asking for all people to get involved and be in the meeting place, to be in a place, the hall, or you're asking for hybrid meetings and we can still have decision making effectively. Sort of as I explained to a councillor in E&R last week, we are now in the 21st century and we have the actual tools to actually take part in a hybrid meeting. You know, and with Civico, we will be able to do that effectively. At the moment, we can't. And with, again, what other councillors have said, the amount of COVID that is actually going around and coming back up again, it is, you know, sort of really dangerous to start thinking about having in-person meetings. But I will go with what, you know, down the line when we have Civico, quite happy to do that. We do need to ensure the participation of the wide demographic of the councillors that we have to represent the residents that they have. And if sort of being remote suits that person, then I think that's all well and good. I mean, I will sort of say what Councillor Ruba Sevignano said before, that this does smack of presenteeism. That is old-fashioned. Presenteeism is old-fashioned. We've moved on. We don't need to be actually all in the place together to make effective decisions. I would say the decisions we made on E&R last week were quite effective. Everybody got to speak and say what they thought. And I think it does work correctly. And I think also, as somebody who was a new councillor last time, it took me months to be able to stand up in the actual committee room to actually speak. Whereas here, I find it much easier to speak and to see who else wants to join in as well. So I just think that the presenteeism is something that seems to be something that the Tory party have got hold of, be that in Westminster or in Wales, and we don't need to have that. If people can effectively get on board and discuss things in a meeting, then I think that's all well and good. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Champion next, please.
Hello, good evening. I don't like the sexist tone of some of these comments. I can see there's one person actually in the chamber. There may be more than one person in the chamber. And I think it's going to, hybrid is good. Yes, I make, all the points have been made, I think have been valid. I've had trouble listening to Bromwell Brooks. I did in the last meeting. There was a meeting where someone had to get someone's vote on a phone, and there was no guarantee that that was a proper vote. I've had issues with IT. Other people have said they have. I was told by Democratic Services when I became a councillor that some meetings would be actually in the chamber, particularly this meeting. And so I'm a bit disappointed that that hasn't come to part. I think, did Bromwell Brooks say that lots of councillors haven't done the Civico training, and then someone else, I think Mark Wilson, says that it's still being tested? What is the issue there? It's not being tested. I hear a nod, or I see a nod from Liz. So it's ready to run. So, okay, if there's a lot of people that haven't had it, perhaps could Democratic Services give them a point in the right direction, just to G them up? That's all I've got to say, really. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Marnie, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Councillor Marnie.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate your call for brevity earlier, but while I've been listening aghast at some of these comments, my list of topics has grown and grown, so I hope you'll bear with me while I go through them as quickly as I can. 1 hour travelling. Did I honestly hear a councillor go on about 1 hour's travelling every couple of months? What perception to the general public is that? Whilst I appreciate the difficulties faced by this councillor in some of the caring, I don't say duties, I'm sure it's given quite generously and lovingly, but 1 hour's travelling, please don't, you can't come out with stuff like that to the public. What perception is that? Surely the business of this, which has been pointed out time and time again just before here, this is hybrid meeting they're talking about. We, myself and every other person here, accepts if people have difficulties, whether on an immediate nature of an illness or something like that, or a more long-term thing, we're only too delighted to now see that we're in the present world where people having those difficulties can join in without an extra hours travelling once every 2 months or so. The UN Secretary's comments the other day. Are you serious? Who cares what the UN Secretary thinks? What's that got to do with anything? I mean, you can make this stuff up. I've heard Labour councillor after Labour councillor bang on in opposition to this. Don't forget, we've got a Labour, well, Welsh Assembly, or whatever they're calling themselves down the bay this week, allowing packed pubs, clubs, restaurants, supermarkets. Why are we any different? I just don't get it. I would put a caveat to that of we don't want to see people going down with COVID all over the place. Obviously, nobody wants that. But surely anybody who wants to attend the in person, then let's let them do so. And those who don't, then they don't have to. And let's not forget, I've been calling for years and years of recording of phone calls between the public and councillors with officers of this council, so we all have a record of what is said, and been turned down time after time after time. We've moved on a stage here, and this current setup, or hybrid setup, allows people who aren't in the chamber to engage. I've just heard a councillor that they'd be too nervous to speak in public. We are representatives of the people in your ward. You have to get up and sometimes give often impassioned pleas and requests for help for their wards. Perhaps people of that nature should have asked the representatives of the party they represent what was required before they stood for election. but they can still, of course, use the hybrid system. I find that quite incredible as well. There's a cut and thrust to politics, a face-to-face cut and thrust, which is all part of it, which is totally lost in this. I myself was thrown out of the previous Zoom meeting by the mayor after complaining that I couldn't hear what Neil Moore had said or was proposing, because he was cutting in and out like a latter-day Norman Collier. And I was chucked out. I said I was not prepared to vote if I can't hear what was being said, and was chucked out of the meeting. Well, you can't do that when it's face-to-face in the council chamber. So that's another reason why not. We've heard perceptions by another Labour councillor, the perception of the public. Yeah, you're right. It is the perception of the public that everybody's sitting in a back bedroom doing nothing. I know that isn't the case. However, that is the perception, 100% bang on. And by this sort of setup, you're enhancing that perception. Same councillor mentioned the state of the roads. Yes, I'd like to mention the state of the roads, the Labour administration, who have been in charge for most of the time I've been a councillor. You're right. They're terrible. Who's to blame for that? So do that. So, as has been pointed out, what is wrong with a hybrid? If 30 councillors want to turn up in County Hall and 20 odd don't, well, so be it. They can all still participate. But anybody who says they're not prepared, or not, nobody said that actually, that they're uncomfortable facing other people and presenting stuff in public, seriously, you should have asked before you became a councillor or stood to become a councillor. It's all part of the whole situation, the game, if you like, perhaps not quite the right word. It's all part of politics in general. So I'll be voting for this motion. However, I do put the caveat that should be looked at any new scientific medical advice of rising COVID rates or whatever, and done in line with what's done with the rest of the society, as I mentioned, pubs, clubs, supermarkets, etc. Thank you for letting me put all my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Marnie. Councillor Godfrey, please.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to say that listening to what everybody had to say tonight, I believe we lived in a democratic society and we're part of a democratic council. A lot of the comments that have come across tonight have been extremely autocratic, which I think is totally wrong, and the general public will be mortified. The motion was to have hybrid meetings to give everybody the freedom of choice, which we're all entitled to. With regards to also what concerns me, I've heard people talk about childcare. My children are now in their 30s. Growing up, both my wife and myself held full-time jobs. I had to travel a lot. We shared the responsibility of looking after the children. We had to get on with it. We had to go to work every day. And I'm sorry, as the previous councillor has just said, if you sign up for the role, you've got to take on the responsibility. I do respect that it's difficult for some people, and that's why I think the hybrid fits both purposes. But to use as an excuse that the time it takes to travel to a meeting, well, I think the general public will be mortified. That's not acceptable to me. The childcare, yes, well, if you've got the hybrid, you've got the opportunity to dial into the meeting from home, and that's fine. But we should all have the freedom of choice. If we prefer to go to the chamber, we should be allowed to do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Michael Morgan, please.
Sorry, I'm awake. Yeah. I do understand what the motion says. The first part of it is saying that we regret that we are not currently holding meetings in a hybrid format. But surely the council is moving towards that anyway. The council is not saying we're not going to do hybrid meetings. I mean, the draft policy of the 22nd of April says that quite clearly. So there's nothing to regret. If I can quote Edith Piaf, I regret nothing as far as that is concerned. The second part of the motion is that we recognise that in-person meetings allow more effective scrutiny and decision-making than meetings that are held virtually. I don't agree with that. I think that everybody's circumstances are very different. We've heard from people who have childcare issues and caring issues and travelling issues. And I'll share my personal issue. So I'm deaf. Not a lot of you know that, but I have virtually no natural hearing. It's corrected by big national health hearing aids. And I'm sure that there are other members of the council who have similar issues. I can engage fully in this meeting because I've got my gadgets and I can hear what everybody is saying and I can relate to you. But when I'm in the council chamber or in committee rooms, it is a struggle. There are supposed to be loop systems in place, but they've never worked properly for me. The volume isn't right. And sometimes I just don't have a clue what's going on. And that's why I embrace this. And so I'm saying that this allows me to be effectively involved in the scrutiny and decision making without having to be in a council chamber. So that's the second part of that motion. So really, I just wonder why we're here. Everybody said so much about it. We're talking about something which is already agreed by the council. So why on earth? You know, I think we've been talking about it now for the best part of 3/4 of an hour, when there are much more important business to get our teeth into. So I won't be voting in favour of this motion, I'm afraid, because I think this council is moving towards hybrid meetings. I think that we need to show respect to the IT people in the Vale who got us all active on Teams and Zoom or whatever when we couldn't meet in person. And I know they're probably doing their damnedest now to get hybrid meetings sorted out for us. But they've had to go through an election and training for everybody and all that. So it's not fair on them, the implied criticism of this motion either. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I take your point about how long we've been debating this issue. It is important. There are a lot of voices that wanted to come in. We're almost there. There are a few more people who want to speak. Councillor Rhys-Thomas, can I just remind you that if you'd like to speak, please do just raise your hand and I will bring you in. Otherwise, we will move on to Councillor Ian Johnson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Morgan for his speech just then, because I think he's the first person in the 50 minutes or so who's actually engaged with the substance of the motion. Because the problem is that we've just listened to an awful lot of disingenuous claptrap coming from both Conservative and Labour councillors here. The Case Council has a policy on this. It was set out in April. It was passed by Cabinet, by Council. It is being enacted by our teams and our Democratic Services team behind the scenes, and we are moving towards that. In fact, I believe that Thursday Cabinet meeting is being advertised as being hybrid. It's quite clear that we already have people who are sat in the room in the council chamber taking part in meetings, even though the rest of us are sat in our rooms at home. So the whole premise behind this motion is disingenuous. We are already doing this. So why bring a motion to council to say this is what we're doing? It's like having a motion on the sun rising tomorrow. It's going to happen regardless. You're not bringing anything new to the council by bringing this motion forward. Where I'm disappointed is that obviously could have simply been a question. What is the rollout? What is the timescale for us implementing hybrid meetings, which is something that we have already agreed as a council and we are implementing. And that takes time. So it's not the principle that we're debating here, or we shouldn't be debating here. It's not the principle we should be discussing. And yet, because the Conservatives have brought forward a motion that says we should have hybrid meetings, I suddenly, bizarrely, have people from the Labour Party complaining about the motion. I don't understand which bits of that part you've been talking about in the entire 45 minutes we've been discussing this. And Councillor Perks was the only person who actually sort of brought up the fact that the second element of it, the idea that in-person meetings lead to better scrutiny, is potentially flawed, is actually an issue. Now, if you want to disagree with that, that's fine. Put forward an amendment. Perhaps the leader will be doing that when she speaks now. And then we can all agree that actually we're going to have hybrid meetings in future, because that's our policy. So we're going to have a situation now, instead of amending the motion that's been put forward by the Conservatives, we're going to have Labour councillors voting on a fig leaf against the policy that they're actually implementing as the administration of the council. This makes absolutely no sense. Really, there should not have been a motion. It should have been a simple question about timescale for rollout of something that was already agreed, and instead we wasted an awful lot of time on something that's really not going to change anything, because over the next couple of weeks and months, we're going to have a hybrid system. People will be able to attend meetings in person should they choose to do so. They'll be able to attend meetings remotely should they choose to do so, in line with our policies. Now, I'll be supporting this motion because I see no point in voting against what we're already doing. I'm not happy with all the things that George is suggesting. I'm not usually very happy with what George suggests anyway, but that is our policy. That is what we have agreed to do. It's what the Labour and Llanthwys and Vale Independent Administration agreed to do, and this council agreed to do before the election. It's what we're doing now. Why are we debating this? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Rhys-Thomas, please.
Thank you. And it has been a long discussion, so I won't keep anyone longer than is necessary. I have to go back to what Councillor Haines said. She said that Councillor Godfrey was young, like George and I. I think Russell will take that as a great compliment, but I don't think he's young, actually. So I just want to clarify that, and I'm sure it'll perk him up for the rest of the evening. Obviously, as has been said, hybrid is the choice to meet in person or meet online. If you're concerned about climate change, if you've broken your arm, if you've got childcare, you can still meet from home. You can meet from your bedroom or your dining table, but other people can meet in person. And as a newly elected councillor and the chairman of a committee, that's where I personally would want to be able to meet people and be able to speak to people, really get to know people, because that's one of the things that I haven't had as a newly elected and young councillor, is actually getting to meet people in person and talk about things, which I think would really be valuable for me and other newly elected councillors, although I won't speak to that for them. And I'd like to thank Councillor Campbell for her clarification on the hybrid point as well. So from Cardiff to Conway, from Monmouthshire to Merthyr, councillors and officers all over Wales have been able to implement hybrid. I mean, there's only 2 councils in the entirety of Wales that haven't implemented hybrid properly already. The Vale is one of those 2 councils who has so far been unable to do it. And I think the Vale, we shouldn't be left behind here. We should catch up with the rest of Wales and the rest of the modern world and implement this hybrid system. Other people have done it. Labour councils have done it. We've heard a lot about how this is sort of some awful, evil and conservative plot to do something. But Labour councils have done it. Swansea, Newport, Cardiff, North and South. It's Labour councils implementing this. And Welsh Conservatives here today, we just want the Vale to be brought into line with the rest of Wales. So in closing, I'd just like to know why Labour councillors in the Vale of Glamorgan are opposed to the rest of their Welsh Labour Party, and why comrades across Wales and the Labour Party are wrong and they're right.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Before I bring in the leader, Councillor Burnett, Councillor Carroll, I'd be grateful if you could indicate if you want to respond. Otherwise, once Councillor Burnett has spoken, I'll move to a vote. Councillor Burnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a really interesting debate this evening. And yes, it's an hour and a quarter of our lives, or an hour of our lives we won't get back. But I think it's actually saying something very, very important, that people feel passionately about the ability to attend meetings virtually. First of all, though, I will go on to the specifics of the motion. Now, the motion is in 3 parts. So we're not just talking about hybrid meetings, we're talking about saying that, unlike other councils, well, as we know, it's not unlike all other councils. It is all councils are on a trajectory of adoption of multi-location meetings. So the first part of it is incorrect. The second part of it recognises that in-person meetings allow for more effective scrutiny and decision making than meetings that are held virtually. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. And I'll give you a couple of figures here, is that if you actually look at it, in terms of unique views of our webcasts, the numbers of people watching the webcast are far greater than the odd couple of people that would normally come into the public gallery or go into the back of a cabinet meeting. Any existing councillors, would they have expected to have had 54 people in the back of a cabinet meeting? I've never been in that situation. So the ability to has that happened? Sorry, pardon? Yes, right, thanks. So to say that in-person meetings are more effective when we know that we have greater public participation in meetings that our webcast is very, very true. And it calls for future council, cabinet and committee meetings to be held in hybrid format. But as we know, that's already in progress. As we know that on the 25th of May, 25th of April, this council voted on or passed that. Councillor Carroll was in attendance and he didn't speak or oppose it. So, you know, how on earth this motion is supposed to have changed that timing, I have no idea. We are moving fast towards hybrid meetings, but you try it out where you can control it. And we have had situations with cabinet meetings where we've had to change format very quickly when there have been glitches with IT. We are moving towards it. There is no need whatsoever to ask for it. But what I would say is, in so many people speaking tonight, that this is important. The move towards multi-location meetings is important, and it is happening, because not only, as I've said, does it increase the diversity of engagement, it increases the diversity of democracy. I'm really proud of the fact that nearly 56% of our candidates at the last election were women. And a lot of that was because people knew about the multi-location policy, the way that they could participate in meetings, both without having to face up to shouty people on the other side of a table, but also so they could fit it in with their lifestyles. I'm really proud of the diverse nature of our group, since that is not reflected right across the council. And while we are a gender balanced council, that doesn't reflect all groups. So maybe we need to do even more in terms of allowing people to step up. So to have a meeting, to have a motion that is unnecessary, calling for something that we're already doing, and stating things that are patently untrue, sorry, there is no way on earth that I could support this, and I hope that this is not the future of motions in this council, where we debate for an hour at a time something that's already happening. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, please, and then we will move to a vote.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to begin by thanking all members who contributed in the debate. For obvious reasons, there were a large number of contributions, so I'm not going to be able to address every single point that was raised, but I would like to address some of the key points that perhaps were raised more frequently than others. Firstly, I do think that, as Councillor Johnson, Councillor Campbell and other members stated, some members perhaps don't understand what this motion is calling for. The first point of the motion regrets that we haven't yet moved to a hybrid system. Now, as Councillor Rhys-Thomas explained, many other councils across Wales, I think Cardiff, Conwy being two examples, Bridgend as well, have already implemented their hybrid technology. It's a matter of regret that the technology is not yet in operation.
Forgive me, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Burnett has raised a point of order, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to take that point of order, and when that's resolved, then I'll come back to you. Councillor Burnett.
Just to say, Cardiff Council can't do hybrid meetings currently. The WLGA AGM had to be moved from Cardiff because they were unable to host a hybrid meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Carroll, can I invite you back in, please?
Well, I'm aware that Cardiff Council have held full council in hybrid. If a subsequent issue has arisen, then I will be corrected on that by Councillor Burnett. But I know that they have met in person because I know several councillors on Cardiff Council, and they did meet in person. But the point I was making, Madam Mayor, is that the motion regrets the fact that we haven't implemented this already, and I think that we do need to speed along on that. So I would hope that by passing this motion, the council will, to coin a phrase, kick on and get this in place. I think another point that was raised, and that's in relation to the council meeting that was held on the 25th of April. I didn't oppose the motion then when it was discussed, because I support a hybrid council. That's the whole point. As I said in my opening remarks, we're not calling on all meetings to be held fully in person at all times, above all else, Madam Mayor, because legislation precludes us from doing so. So there would be no point in tabling a motion to that effect, even if that had been our intention, which it wasn't this evening. So I would simply say I had hoped that we would achieve unanimity on this. I think that Councillor Johnson suggested that certain elements of the motion, Councillor Burnett or another councillor may have wished to amend the motion. I'm surprised and somewhat disappointed that they're using this as an opportunity instead merely to vote against the whole principle, but I will watch on with interest. I would urge all members to support this. I do think it's vital that we move to a hybrid model as soon as possible, and for those reasons I urge all members to support the motion this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. We will now move to a vote. The substantive item remains. Chief Executive, can I hand over to you, please? Sorry, Councillor Johnson, are you trying to make a point?
Point of order, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. I just have clarification from the Chief Executive or the Monitoring Officer of the impact of particularly with regards to the third point here, calls for future full council, cabinet and committee meetings to be held in hybrid format. I just want to clarify what impact that being rejected will have. Will that does that change the council's position? Because if we're rejecting that call, then does that impact on previous decisions?
Mayor, with your permission, I would say it wouldn't impact on the policy of this council. So if there is a policy that has been put in place, and there has been on hybrid meetings, it wouldn't impact on that, because this is dealing with this motion for what it is, which is a single item. In fact, you could go further, because I think it was Councillor Marnie who made the point that COVID is still prevalent and rates could increase again. So you could argue that there will become a time in future when even hybrid meetings might not be appropriate, and they'll have to move back to being entirely remote. For example, if legislation or guidance around COVID changes in the autumn and in the winter. I'm not saying it will, but it is possible that that could happen with rates increasing.
Thank you for that clarification, Chief Executive. The substantive motion now stands. I'm not going to read it in full because I think we've had a very thorough debate and councillors understand the motion that's before us. So can I ask that we move to a vote? Chief Executive, would you take us through that vote?
Yes, I will. I'll run through the roll call of members again, and if I ask members to say whether they're for the motion, against the motion, or if they wish to abstain from voting. So we'll start with Councillor Anne Asprey, please.
For the motion.
Councillor Julie Aviat.
Against.
Councillor Gareth Ball.
Against.
Councillor Rhiannon Birch.
Against.
Councillor Bronwyn Brooks.
Okay.
Councillor Gillian Bruce.
For the motion.
Councillor Ian Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Liz Burnett.
Against the motion.
Councillor Samantha Campbell.
For the motion.
Councillor George Carroll.
For.
Councillor Christine Cave.
For the motion. For the motion.
Thank you. Yeah, got that. Councillor Charles Champion.
For the motion.
Councillor Janice Charles. Councillor Charles.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Millie Collins.
For the motion.
Councillor Pamela Drake.
Against the motion.
Councillor Vince Driscoll.
For the motion.
Councillor Anthony Ernest.
For the motion.
Councillor Robert Fisher.
For the motion.
Councillor Chris Franks.
For the motion.
Councillor Wendy Gilligan.
Against.
Councillor Russell Godfrey.
For the motion.
Councillor Emma Goodjohn.
Against the motion.
Councillor Ewan Goodjohn.
Against the motion.
Councillor Stephen Haines.
For.
Councillor Howard Hamilton.
Against the motion.
Councillor William Hennessy.
For the motion.
Councillor Nick Hodges.
For.
Councillor Mark Hooper.
For.
Councillor Catherine Iannucci.
Against the motion.
Councillor Gwyn John.
Against the motion.
Councillor Ian Johnson.
O Blaid y cynnig.
Councillor Susan Lloyd Selby.
Against the motion.
Councillor Julie Lynch Wilson.
Against the motion.
Councillor Kevin Marney.
For.
Councillor Naomi Marshalsea.
Against the motion.
Councillor Michael Morgan.
Against the motion.
Councillor Jane Norman.
Against the motion.
Councillor Helen Payne.
Against the motion.
Councillor Elliot Penn.
Against this motion.
Councillor Sandra Perks.
Against the motion.
Councillor Ian Perry.
Effective and against.
Councillor Joanna Prythrow.
Against the motion.
Councillor Ruba Sivanianum.
Against.
Councillor Caris Stallard.
Yn erbyn.
Councillor Neil Thomas.
Against the motion.
Councillor Rhys Thomas.
For the motion.
Councillor Steffan William.
O Blaid.
Councillor Margaret Wilkinson.
Against.
Councillor Mark Wilson.
Against the motion.
Councillor Eddie Williams.
Against the motion.
And Councillor Nicholas Wood.
For the motion.
I make that 29 against and 22 for, so the motion is rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chief Executive. We move on to item 6 in the agenda, report of the Chief Executive, use of the Chief Executive's emergency powers. This item is for noting.
Thank you, Mayor. And this item is to notify Council of the use of emergency powers by the Chief Executive since the last report, which was on the 7th of March 2022. This is as in line with the Council's constitution, which says that a Chief Executive, or in his absence, the nominated deputy, after consulting with appropriate cabinet member, and in the case of matters involving council.
Seconded, has it?
Oh,
hasn't been seconded.
No, I haven't moved it yet.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm just checking with Rob.
Yeah. Yeah. So under Council's constitution, the Chief Exec can exercise his emergency powers, and on this in this situation, the Chief Exec has, under paragraph 2, it lays out the amendment to guide to public speaking at Planning Committee, the Oracle Fusion implementation, Welsh Government £150 cost of living scheme, and the regional collaboration in the UK government's Ukrainian settlement pathways. And I would so move.
And I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was eager to move us on, Councillor Bennett. So thank you. I see no hands, so I assume that recommendation is approved. We moved on to item 7, use of the urgent decision procedure under Article 15.14 on the Constitution, again for noting.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. And yes, this is for motion. It's the use of the urgent decision procedure under Article 15.14. older members would have heard that as 1414. It used to be. It's moved slightly, and I'll take all items together. So that's 7A, draft multi-location meetings policy, draft item B, draft model constitution guide, C, the temporary highway trading licenses, and D, the levelling up fund round 2, a UK shared prosperity fund. And I'd so move.
And I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you. I see no hands, so I assume no dissent, and we will move on to item 8, questions from elected members. The first question is from Councillor MJG Morgan concerning a flexi bus service. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. So thank you, Councillor Morgan, for the question. The use of the Chief Executive's emergency powers in this case was related to COVID and required to fund call centre staff to assist with flexi bookings for Welsh Government. Just for clarity, the process was used to allow our customer relations team to enter a contractual arrangement with Transport for Wales for the provision of call centre services, and this allowed residents from the areas of Wales where the flexi service operated, who were unable to use the mobile app, then to use the telephone to book a bus. The call handling posts were funded by Transport for Wales through that contract. Our customers relations team was unable to create the call centre service quickly due to the use of the Welsh Government funded Connecting Wales technology platform. In terms of this service operating in the Vale of Glamorgan in the future, our officers did meet with Transport for Wales to discuss the scheme back in June 2020. Officers considered the financially supported service B3, which, if anybody's wondering, is the garden suburb, Barry Town Centre to Cadoxton, for the Uber-style app. The proposal was to enable the whole of Barry to be served, including areas currently not served or with limited service provision by this revised service, which would become flexible and on demand, thus further enabling onboard social distancing to be better managed. However, we needed the bus operator to buy into this proposal, as there were additional costs to pay for the use of the software. For example, £100 per vehicle per week, maximum cost £10,500 approximately if 2 vehicles needed to be set up. At the time, and with the COVID situation, it was not considered to be financially viable. It should be noted, however, that we also already offer our own dial ride service, which is Green Links. While not app-based, it works in the same way, but via telephone calls. As it currently stands, it's not proposed to introduce a flexi scheme into the Vale at this time, and for these following reasons. A reduced demand for bus services at the present time, the need to have bus patronage back to pre-COVID levels on regular service buses, supported local bus costs rising, operator revenue is low compared to pre-COVID, the ongoing Transport for Wales Welsh Government work that's taking place, and which is actually looking into the South East Wales bus network, and then the Welsh Government's white paper on reforming bus services, which they're actually looking at franchising or potentially franchising, which is something that this council is actively taking part in. Officers will, however, keep this matter under review, and should the situation change, I will advise members accordingly. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Next question is also from Councillor Morgan concerning the Council's traffic management and road safety policy. Thank you for the question, Councillor Morgan, and I'll invite Councillor Brooks as the Cabinet Member for Sustainable Places to respond.
May I ask
Thank you.
a secondary question to Councillor Brooks's reply?
You may, Councillor Morgan. I'd be grateful if councillors who wish to ask secondary questions could raise their hands. It makes it easier to manage, but thank you. Please do ask your question.
Well, very briefly, I knew nothing about this until I passed a flexi bus in Newport a couple of months ago, and I thought that looks interesting. And I look at it from the viewpoint not from as Councillor Brooks has tried, improving the services of people in Barry and the towns in the Vale, but the rural areas of the Vale where we have next to no bus service at all. In my ward, we've got one bus service that goes from Talbot Green to Cardiff, and that's it. And it just seems to me that this is something that could be examined further. And if it's not flexi, can we embark, please, on a review of public transport in the rural areas? I appreciate that's not something that you can necessarily answer now, but I'll write to you further on this, because we are neglected in the rural Vale as far as transport is concerned. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Councillor Morgan. Yeah, happy to meet with you, or if you email, more than happy to speak to you. But just sort of emphasise that we have got the Green Link service there. I would encourage, and it does cover the rural Vale as well. And what I would encourage members is for us to actually promote the Green Link service out in with our communities. If you ring up the day before, you can book it for the following day. So there is that flexibility around that. But in the meantime, I would actually encourage us as local members to encourage our communities to actually use that Green Link service. But yeah, Councillor Morgan, happy to meet with you or discuss this further as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Moving on then to the next question from Councillor Morgan concerning the Council's traffic management and road safety policy. Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Morgan. Welsh Government announced on the 12th of June 2022 the decision to introduce a default speed limit of 20 miles an hour in Wales. At this current time, our officers are working hard to plan and deliver this project in time for the current introduction date of September 2023, which obviously is just over a year away, but that time will move very quickly. So this means that there are limited service resources to undertake any further large-scale traffic policy work. But in addition, it would be inappropriate to undertake this work prior to the implementation of the ongoing 20-mile-an-hour default project, as this involves the review of various guidance associated with setting of speed limits, which would be an essential part of any such policy. There is a detailed plan of active travel proposals for the Vale of Glamorgan, and this can be found on the council's website if anybody is actually interested in that. And I would, encourage people, members and our public as well, to do that. The work to develop an authority-wide traffic management and road safety policy will commence following the implementation of the 20-mile-an-hour default speed limit. If there are any, if Councillor Morgan, if you do have any specific issues, whether this is around a specific issue or locality that you've got any concerns about, obviously I'm happy to explore those matters further then through discussion, obviously outside of this meeting here. And I would extend that invitation obviously to all members. But I do welcome this consultation that's going on around the 20 mile an hour. And I do welcome that we start that as a good policy. Obviously, there will be changes and amendments in time, and that will settle in, but I do welcome that policy. So thank you, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Morgan, you have a supplementary question?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you for that, Councillor Brooks. And I'm disappointed that nothing seems to be going to happen immediately on this. I mean, this resolution was formed from a diluted request made earlier last year for a rural roads policy, which the last cabinet decided wasn't necessary because all roads are the same. But they're not. I mean, on Sunday afternoon in Cloud Cork Village, everything was brought to a standstill by two massive coaches making their way from Birmingham to Barry Island, and they decided to go through Cloud Cork Village to go into a farmer's field to turn around to get back to the road. This is entirely because there's not adequate signage to tell people that it's not suitable for major coaches. And similarly, there have been juggernauts trying to get through there to get to Aston Martin. The signage isn't there. And also in Peterston, we've had incidents and your fatal collision a few weeks ago with a cyclist. You don't get this in the towns, but you don't get cyclists hurtling down the hill into your village at 45, 50 miles an hour. But in that case, the cyclist suffered a serious injury, and it could have been a lot worse. These are issues that concern us.
Forgive me, Councillor Morgan. Can I ask you if you have a supplementary question for the Cabinet member? Thank you.
May I contact you, Councillor Brooks, just to raise again the question of rural roads and whether we can introduce a policy. I know that Councillor Cave is asking a question about this later, so I won't steal her thunder on the matter, but it is something of concern to those of us who live and work in the rural wards.
Yeah, no, of course, Councillor Morgan, more than happy to meet with you or discuss this further as well. Always ready to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Next question from Councillor Dr. Ian Johnson concerning social services support. Thank you for the question, Councillor Johnson. Invite the Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, Councillor Williams, to respond, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, the question is about how many people are currently waiting for social service support and what is the Council doing to reduce that number. People approach, as you're aware, Councillor Johnson, people approach social service for a variety of reasons. And the question is very broad. And so I've endeavoured to give some broad details, firstly for adults, and then secondly for children and young people. If there is anything specific that you would like and you have concerns about, then please maybe you can deal with that as a supplementary or through further discussion. I'll probably suggest after tonight's motion that we probably be better offline. Okay, so regarding the adults assessment, in adult services, there are currently 99 people in the community waiting for a social service assessment. There are an additional 6 people waiting in hospital for an assessment by a social worker. There are no urgent cases awaiting assessment, but there are 24 awaiting allocation and 75 cases awaiting input from an occupational therapist. And these are low priority. The standard we seek to achieve is for assessment to be made within 12 weeks. For adults waiting for a service, there are 5 people waiting for a care home placement. 3 are permanent, 1 temporary and 1 respite. There are 120 people waiting for domiciliary care. However, just over 20 of those are temporarily receiving that care from the Vale Community Resource Service, which specialise in providing rehabilitation and rehabilitation. For children and young people, the picture here is different. Sorry, there was an interruption there. I can hear myself. Right, okay, thank you. The picture here is different, and the detail I'll provide relates to the numbers waiting to be assessed. This is position as at 11th of July 2022. 10 children in 9 families awaiting assessment by the Child Health and Disability team. It is expected a number of these children will be allocated for assessment within a week. And 39 children in 28 families awaiting assessment by the Intake team. The list of children waiting is kept under regular review and allocated according to need. I hope that's a sufficient response, but hopefully depends on the supplementary from Councillor Johnson. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I've had a bit of a technical problem, so you probably won't be able to see me twice because the camera seems to have gone off on one computer, and so I've had to go on to the other. So apologies, that's probably a little strange. I think I caught the majority of Councillor Williams' comments there. Could I just and thank you very much to Councillor Williams for the detail he's provided, and I'll look to pick up with him more detail offline. But for now, could I just clarify that see at the moment some of our council's greatest problems are regarding market fragility and demand and service capacity. They're rated very highly on our council risk register. I'm just looking for clarity regarding the situation regarding staffing and whether that's affecting our ability to deliver at the moment. Thank you, Mayor.
As ever, Councillor Johnson, you've given me quite a lot of questions there to cover. The short answer is yes, there are several people waiting. As I indicated, there are assessments taking place. I suppose if I read just through a bit more information, there are it's with the adults aspect, there are 100 people waiting for care at home, and this is where the authorities find it particularly difficult to meet those people's needs. As a result, the service is conducting risk assessments, as you suggested, for those individuals to ensure that they are prioritised. Domiciliary care is particularly difficult to source in rural areas, and as a result, specific initiatives are in place to develop additional capacity in the Western Vale. The supply and demand of domiciliary care are carefully monitored, and over the last 3 months, a growing number of packages have been placed each month. In April, this was 108 packages, and in June, 136. There is, however, a gap in capacity, and I can go through a lot more detail, if you like, what the social services are doing. There are several measures that have been put in place to attempt to mitigate the situation, and if you're happy with that, I'll forward that on to you and the rest of the council.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We'll move on to the next question from Councillor Johnson concerning the number of council houses built by the council. Can I invite the Cabinet Member for Public Sector Housing and Tenant Engagement, Councillor Wilkinson, to respond, please?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Your question is how many council houses is being built in the last decade? Given the housing crisis in this country, let alone in the Vale of Glamorgan, straightforward answer is not enough. But the good news is that the council is building council properties. Their programme is started in September 2017, and since this date, council has completed 76 properties in this following areas: Francis Road, 3 units; Jenner Falls, 28 units; Home View, Phase 1, 11 units; Port Road, 11 units; Hayes Road, 23 units. 67 properties are currently under construction, and these are St Cyrus Road, Penarth, 14, Hayswood Road, Barry, 53. We are in contract for 32 properties and waiting construction starting dates at Colebrook Road East, 20 units, Colcott Clinic area, 12 units, waiting planning decisions but due to start on site in 2022-23 on a further 49 properties at the following locations: Home View Phase 2, 31 units, Mitre Fenning, Bonvilston, 8 units, Olives Lodge, pending, 10 units. In addition, we currently have 346 units for schedule at our next development stage from 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Can I just respectfully remind members that except for Cabinet members and group leaders, please can you ensure your mics and cameras are switched off? Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much to Councillor Wilkinson for that response. It's pleasing to hear about projects under delivery, but of course that's only 15 units completed per year in the past 5 years, and obviously we were not able to build council houses prior to that. To what consideration is the Cabinet Member given to the in terms of the numbers that she just quoted for future development? What impact are we anticipating from both the inflation and supply chain issues which are currently affecting the construction industry, and how is that likely to affect delivery in the coming years?
Well, I can find out the full answer for you, but yes, we are having difficulties with materials and contractors, but we are working hard to make sure we are allowed to build more properties, because we have to start buying land as well. We're running out of housing land, and we have definitely got a pattern and we're going to work to it. But we are having difficulties with materials and prices, but I will get the full answer to you, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Next question from Councillor Johnson concerning Model Farm. And can I invite the Cabinet Member for Community Engagement, Equalities and Regulatory Services, Councillor Sivinianum, to respond, please? You're on mute, Councillor.
I apologise. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. Planning permission for Model Farm was quashed in last October by a court order following judicial review. So that means that the planning application is now back with the council for determination. A new public consultation regarding the planning application was undertaken earlier in the year. But as you will know, Councillor Johnson, people can still put in their views right up until this goes to the planning committee. There was also additional viability information presented by the applicants. So that information is currently being independently reviewed on behalf of the council. So the application remains to be assessed, giving consideration to the public consultation and the review of the viability evidence. And then this will then go before the planning committee for consideration once the process is complete. It should be noted that the application is also currently subject to a holding direction from Welsh Government, which again, Councillor Johnson, I'm sure you know this, but I wasn't totally aware of this. But the holding direction means that the Welsh Government will determine the application once the ministers have seen the new committee report from the planning committee and any recommendations the planning committee makes. So the application is not on the next planning committee's agenda on at the end of this month, but it's hoped it might come back in the autumn.
Councillor Johnson, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you for that response, Councillor Sivinianum, although I think it might require a little bit of unpacking. So just to clarify, the planning, as I said, it wasn't necessarily intended as the question I was going to ask. The planning committee, the planning officers will write a report and present to planning committee. Planning committee will make recommendations and then Welsh Government will make the final decision. Am I understanding your words correctly? And what I'd like a little bit of also clarification on is that, with respect, Mayor, that in the planning meeting where we discussed Model Farm last time, there was reference to the fact that there'd been no major changes, significant changes in planning legislation since the introduction of the 2017 local development plan in the Vale of Glamorgan, and suggested that there was no weight behind the climate change emergency or nature emergency declared by Vale of Glamorgan Council or Welsh Government. I'd just like to clarify whether we've had any legal advice regarding the status of those declarations and their implementation within planning policy.
With regards to Model Farm or broadly?
More broadly, but I mean specifically regards to Model Farm, but broadly as well.
Well, I'm not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean that's not the case. But I'm certainly happy to get that information for you, Councillor Johnson, and to other members. So if you're happy for me to do that.
Just to clarify that, my understanding of your answer.
Forgive me, Councillor Johnson. I think there are a number of questions within that supplementary. Can I respectfully suggest that perhaps you pick up any further clarification with the Cabinet Member outside this meeting?
I think that's, with respect, Mayor, I think that's a question that the general public would like confirmed whether I've correctly interpreted what she's told to the meeting. Otherwise, we're going to go off in different directions as to what that means.
Then we'll take the first part of your supplementary question, and I suggest you follow up with the Cabinet Member for the second part. So, Councillor Sivinianum, if you'd just like to respond to that first question, and then we'll move on.
So if you can repeat the first part of your question, because I am slightly confused, Councillor Johnson, because you've asked me a specific policy question around our declaration and whether we've received legal advice. So that I'm happy to get information for you about. So the So can you clarify what the first part of your question is?
Yeah, thank you for bearing with me, Councillor Siviniano. I was looking to clarify what your initial answer. Your initial answer was, as I understand it, that our planning officers will write a report that will go to our planning committee. Our planning committee will make comments but not make a decision, and Welsh Government will make the final decision. Am I understanding that process correctly, or have I missed a stage here?
No, so that's correct. So Welsh Government, so this direction from Welsh Government means that that prevents us from making a decision. So once once this has gone to planning after the giving consideration to the public consultation, this independent review of the new viability evidence information that has been brought, obviously officers will then give their report to the planning committee, who will then in the normal way make a recommendation. So Welsh Government will then consider that, and then until that's considered by them, we can't make a decision. So that is correct. And that's also my understanding.
Thank you, Councillor Siviniano. And we'll move on to next question from Councillor Johnson concerning new build Welsh medium school in Cowbridge. And can I invite the Cabinet Member for Education, Arts and the Welsh Language, Councillor Birch, to respond?
Evening. Thank you for your question, Dr. Johnson. The new build Welsh medium school in Cowbridge proposal will need to be subject to a statutory consultation process. This is provisionally planned for September 22. And a final determination on the education proposal is likely to be March 23. This consultation is required to determine what form of Welsh medium primary school would be most appropriate based on the statutory considerations outlined in the School Organisation Code. It is anticipated that the funding for the project will form part of the Extended Sustainable Communities for Learning Band B programme. This will depend on Welsh Government approval to extend the programme. Projects within the Band B programme must be approved before 2024 and completed by 2026. Based on the current estimated timeframe, it is expected that the relevant business case, planning and SAB approvals would be in place by September 23 to allow construction to begin. The new school will be anticipated to open in January 25, subject to no delays in achieving the relevant approvals. The Council's draft Welsh in Education Strategic Plan, covering the years 2022 to 2032, requires the new school to be delivered by 2027. Under the current programme, the Council aims to deliver the new school by 2025. However, this is subject to the necessary funding being in place and the outcome of the relevant stages of the decision-making process.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. We'll move on to the next question, which is from Councillor Hooper, relating, forgive me, sorry.
Do you have a supplementary, Ian?
You need to be quicker, Ian, but yes, please ask your supplementary.
I can see Councillor Birch, waiting for me to be asked. Thank you, Mayor. Just very quickly, obviously this is the first new build since the current work that's going on the Barry waterfront at St Barrack. I'm just wondering whether any lessons that have been learnt from that process in dealing with developers and with the local community that are going to be transferred into the work that's going on for the school in Cowbridge.
Well, I would certainly hope so. If you want to have a chat about that, I'm happy to discuss that with you over the next couple of weeks.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Next question from Councillor Hooper concerning the levelling up funding bid, and can I invite the Executive Leader and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, Councillor Burnett, to respond, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Hooper. Yes, this is related to levelling up funding bid and any new risks. In response, the scope of the levelling up round 2 remains unchanged, and changes within Westminster have not impacted on bid development. The portal for submissions of bids, unfortunately, has still yet to be open, having been delayed due to technical reasons. The council has identified this as a risk in terms of delivery timescales for capital works should the bid be approved. I mean, as we discussed with you at the recent briefing that we provided, it is hoped that the end dates for delivery or the appraisal window will be amended by UK government to mitigate against this delay at the start of the process, but we've yet to hear that.
Councillor Hooper, do you have a supplementary question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Leader. That was thank you for your response. I think we're about 2 minutes away from the number of election candidates for Prime Minister to change from 4 to 3, 3 of whom have all explicitly said they'll raise taxes. And most economists who look at that would suggest that comes at the risk of dropping levelling up funding as being one of the risks from it. So I would hope that the council consider all those risks, and also specifically to any shared prosperity funding that might be there. So I just wonder whether you'd reconsider reviewing those risks, because I think they're very real, they're very tangible, and they're pretty immediate as well.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. I think that in terms of scenario planning, the team are well ahead of working out what might happen here and what might happen there. But actually, until we know what is happening in the Conservative Party, and I don't think they even know at the moment, we still have to wait and see, and we'll act accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Next question from Councillor Cave concerning cutting highway verges. And can I invite Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services, Councillor Wilson, to respond, please?
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Cave. There are set criteria for the various designated areas of the highways verge network, and the detail of this is as follows. There are 150 kilometres of carriageway designated strategic routes within the adopted highway. These are cut during May, July and September throughout the growing season to an average width of 3 metres. There are 655 kilometres of carriageway designated as non-strategic routes within the adopted highway. These are cut on one occasion at an average width of 1 to 2 metres after the third Monday in July to aid users of the carriageway, but also to aid and assist the ecological interests of these verges. There are several recognised vision splies within the highway network that require cutting at the beginning of the growing season to ensure appropriate vision at these junctions. This would usually take place in May. However, in our contract, we also have the ability to call upon a second vision splay cut if verge growth requires it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We move on to the next question from Councillor Cave.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I do have a supplementary question. I've had a problem raising my hand, unfortunately.
Before I take your supplementary question, Councillor Cave, Councillor Barrett-Perry, do you have a point of order? Your hand is raised.
Sorry, I mean, am I allowed to ask a slightly... No, I can't ask a question.
No, I'm afraid you're not. Can I suggest if you have a question on any of the matters this evening that you take it up with Cabinet members outside the meeting? Thank you, Councillor Perry. Apologies for interrupting you, Councillor Cave. Please go ahead.
That's perfectly understandable, Mayor. Well, thank you for your response, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I can see that we have a lot of grass to cut, don't we? I would like to ask the Cabinet member to explain why the grass cutting contractors have been allowed to make their own judgment on when and where to cut grass, which I think is actually putting highway users at risk. In actual fact, I know some of the grass that was dedicated to be cut in May wasn't actually cut. And the grass contractors are making decisions that actually go against the vision displays that we require, and it actually took them several occasions to come out and make that adequate cut. So I actually wonder why we're doing that.
Councillor Wilson, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, of course, and thank you very much for a supplementary, Councillor Kay. I'm happy to investigate that, but I'm not aware of what you just said. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to next question from Councillor Cave concerning rural roads policy. And can I invite Councillor Brooks to respond, please?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cave. The question from Councillor Cave is about support for a rural roads policy. Thank you for your question, and I would advise that I'm aware that this matter has already been responded to and addressed via council questions in the last administration by the previous Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport. I would concur with his statements and positions stated at that time. However, for clarification, especially if we've got lots of new members here, I'll clarify that statement. The Council's local road network comprises a mixture of road classes and unclassified roads within the rural Vale incorporated country lanes. It is the case with a significant number of both urban and rural roads throughout the Vale that these were not designed or constructed to accommodate the current mix and volume of traffic, pedestrians, cyclists and equestrian users, and I would actually include walkers, people walking as well in with that. However, all roads, including rural roads and country lanes, must carry a certain composition of traffic to serve the needs of the local population, both from a business, work and leisure perspective. And motorists who use these roads should do so with the appropriate care and consideration for others. I do emphasise the should do so, because yes, I do accept that not all drivers do adhere to that. It is also accepted that there's a general increase in the use of all roads for various purposes, but this is a Vale-wide and affects all classes or road, both rural and urban. Where specific safety or conflict issues arise along rural roads or country lanes, this is already investigated and managed based on specific investigation and evidence obtained in the same way as urban roads. And then this ensures the council that will comply then with its statutory duty to manage its overall highway network in accordance with the appropriate legislation. Sorry, excuse me a minute. Sorry about that. There are no requirements for the council to manage country lanes or rural roads separately or in a different manner to its other local road network. And there is no evidence that country lanes are generally unsafe, albeit there is a recognition of a slightly different mix of traffic and infrastructure conditions in managing various elements and classes of road within the Vale's local road network. Where issues on any country roads are brought to the council's attention, then these will be fully investigated and based on the evidence and risk approach in the same way that all other roads are assessed and managed. And as I mentioned to Councillor Morgan, I'm more than happy to converse with you outside this Councillor Cave if there are any particular issues which have arisen since this time. As a consequence, and based on the above position, I do not consider that there is a need to have a separate rural roads policy, as safety and traffic conditions are already considered specific to each circumstance and section of road based on investigation and evidence, whether this is a rural country lane or busy urban road. In summary, the council's highway teams review and consider specific concerns on its rural network in the same manner as any other road within the Vale's local highway network. And this is considered adequate, reasonable and proportionate way to deal with safety issues which may be raised or occur at any time. Finally, it's been a bit of a long answer, and I have referenced it in my previous responses. At the Cabinet meeting on the 28th of February, consideration was given to a reference from the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee concerning a suggested rural roads policy in the Vale. Cabinet at the time resolved to note the comments of the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee and subsequent comments from Councillor Morgan, and then considered further by the next administration as part of an authority-wide traffic management and road safety policy that linked with both the 20 mile an hour default speed limits and plans for greater active travel opportunities. And as I've already mentioned, there is the white paper around public transport and the franchise or potential franchising around that, and obviously then the introduction of the 20 mile an hour default speed limits, which I do support. There obviously will be amendments, but I do support that. So I do agree with the previous Cabinet member's position on this matter. And as I've stated, we'll work to develop an authority-wide traffic management and road safety policy that will commence following the implementation of the 20-mile-an-hour default speed limit. So I do think there's a lot of work yet to do around this, and obviously that's after the introduction of that 20-mile-an-hour, there will be reviews taken at that point. But as I said, Councillor Morgan, I'm more than happy to discuss this with you further down the line and at different times as things develop as well.
Thank you for that response. I do have a supplementary, Mayor, if I may. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Morgan for giving me some credit for my long-standing campaign over the last 5 years for a rural roads policy. I do appreciate that. I think one of the problems, as you've already outlined, is that we actually have the same criteria for a rural road as an urban road, and that can't be right. You do say that any issues that raise will be looked at on an individual basis, but your predecessor actually came into the ward and he looked at the issues and he didn't address any of them. So I wonder if my supplementary question to you could be, would you take up my invitation to come into the ward and look at some of those issues that were raised with your predecessor that have to this date not been properly addressed?
More than happy to come and have a visit into the ward. Yeah, so as I said, we can make those arrangements outside this meeting, but yeah, more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Next question is from Councillor Carroll concerning the impact of inflation, and can I invite the leader to respond, please?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Carroll. This is in relation to the Council's response to the impact of inflation on the authority's budgets. And our response would be that the inflationary pressures are impacting on all of the Council's finances, both revenue and capital. For revenue, the Council has been largely protected on rising utility costs, having purchased its gas and electricity in advance, but is seeing pressure coming through on changes to standing charges. Negotiations are ongoing on the 2022-23 pay award, and it's looking likely that the 3% set aside will be insufficient. Services are managing their budgets tightly to ensure the Council's finances are as robust as possible, and regular sessions are being held to discuss budget pressures across all directorates. You'll also be aware that regular revenue and capital, for that matter, monitoring reports are brought before Cabinet and all scrutiny committees so that the budgets can be monitored and, where necessary, action taken to address emerging issues. And there have been very good and in-depth discussions at scrutinies in the last week.
Leader, will you forgive me for interrupting you for one moment? Councillor Carroll, do you have a point of order?
No, it was just a signal that I wish to ask a supplementary.
You're on mute, Councillor Carroll. I can't hear you.
Oh, it was just a signal that I wish to ask a supplementary when the leader.
No, he wants to ask a supplementary.
Can you hear? I can't hear him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Councillor Carroll. Forgive me, I had a problem with my sound. I understand you want to ask a supplementary question. I'm afraid you're not able to do that at this point, but can I suggest that you take that matter up with a Cabinet member subsequent to this meeting? Forgive me for interrupting you, Leader. Please, would you like to before you? Yes, yeah.
Right. So to continue.
Sorry, just to be clear, Councillor Carroll, if we let the leader make her response, and then if you want to ask a supplementary at the end, I'll bring you in. Thank you.
Thank you. So to continue, pressures are also coming through in capital. And again, the finance team are working with service managers to understand the impact of rising prices at a scheme level. As part of this work, we're ascertaining progress on schemes, whether work is underway, contracts agreed, or work still out to tender. Managers are having to value engineer schemes to keep to agreed cost envelopes. In particular cases, as with key projects that are funded via Welsh Government, and that would be the Sustainable Communities for Learning, as was 21st Century Schools, being a key example. Discussions are held to establish whether inflationary pressures can be factored into any awards. Finally, for us all to be aware that the council does hold specific reserves. They're always a point of large debate, aren't they? Both revenue and capital, which are available to be used as a consequence of cost pressures, and that includes inflationary increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to apologise, I thought you'd asked members wishing to ask a supplementary to indicate in good time by raising their hand, so apologies if that caused any confusion. I thank the leader for her answer. I note with interest the point she made at the end in regard to reserves. Quick question really, does she anticipate there being any drawdown from reserves in the near future to cope with the cost of inflation? And if so, what analysis has been done regarding the significance or otherwise of any potential such drawdown?
I think for speed of answer, I think that was fully covered in the committee meetings, in the scrutiny committees that were held recently, where this topic was raised, and also, if I'm not mistaken, in governance and audit, where that was also discussed at length. The reason we've got reserves is exactly to cover the situations. We have reserves that are earmarked. We have reserves that are restricted. Obviously, we wouldn't use those. We also have general fund, and we have specific reserves which support services. That's what they're there for. If it's needed, they will be used. There is some planned drawdown of reserves this year, if you remember from last year's budget planning, and if I'm not mistaken, I think there's about, it's either 500,000 or 1 million going into social care. But that's exactly what reserves are for. If you haven't got them, if we didn't have them, we'd be in a very different position at the moment, wouldn't we? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Next question from Councillor Carroll concerning the highway infrastructure on Landock Hill, and can I invite Councillor Wilson to respond, please?
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Carroll. However, it's unclear exactly what information you're looking for regarding the highway infrastructure on Landock Hill. I can confirm that Landock Hill was recorded as adopted highway, and the council, as local highway authority, has a duty to maintain it at public expense under Section 41 of the Highways Act 1980. I am unaware of any other infrastructure on Landock Hill that you may be referring to. Perhaps if you could elaborate, I'd be happy to respond further.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I thank the Cabinet member for his answer. Anyone who travels Landock Hill frequently will be aware of the state of the road. The potholes on that road have been filled in several times in the past few months, but each time those potholes then deteriorate rather quickly, and we end up with a situation probably worse than before. So my question to the Cabinet member is, will he consider full-scale resurfacing of that road like we've seen on Penland Road, which has been welcomed by residents and would make a big difference to everybody travelling along that route?
Thank you very much, and I will respond. Obviously, as well as inspecting and repairing safety defects in the highway, the council has a programme of highway resurfacing which is prioritised through the council's highway 3 years resurfacing plan. This 3-year surfacing plan provides a method whereby individual roads are identified and prioritised resurfacing through consideration of several specific criteria, which includes, but is not limited to, road classification, ongoing maintenance costs, customer complaints and third-party claims. This process enables the council to implement an annual programme of resurfacing works on a priority basis so as to manage its highways assets in the most cost-effective and beneficial manner, subject to the funding available and use such works. The 3-year plan has recently been updated and was presented to Cabinet on the 7th of July and the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee on the 12th of July. The agendas and minutes of these meetings are available, as you know, via the council website. You may have noted from the Cabinet report, I'm not sure you have actually, that Landock Hill was identified as scoring 195 points on the 3-year resurfacing plan, and is anticipated, based on current funding available this financial year, that resurfacing works will be undertaken to roads scoring a total of 210 points or above.
Therefore, it's unlikely that whether we will service this financial year or those in this position will be viewed again in 2023.
Thank you, Councillor. We will move on to the next question, which is from Councillor Thomas concerning potholes in Penarth. And can I invite Councillor Burnett to respond, please?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Thomas. Yes, this is Councillor Thomas wants to know how many potholes have been reported to the council within Penarth in the last 12 months. And I'm informed that 126 carriageway defects have been reported to the council from July 2021 to June 2022. All of these reported defects have been inspected to ensure that they meet the intervention criteria set by the council, and the criteria are available on the council's website. In fact, we just had a very interesting conversation at Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny about the very subject. In addition, the council's highway inspectors have raised some 242 actionable carriageway defects in Penarth from July 2021 to June 2022. Some of these defects will be in the 126 reported defects identified above. Whilst we regularly inspect all our highways, as has been detailed, defects will appear in between these inspections. We therefore encourage all residents to use the reported feature on our website if they're concerned about a pothole, or alternatively to telephone our contact centre with this information. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Do you have a supplementary?
I do. Thanks, Leader Burnett, for that answer, and I share. Obviously, people should report potholes as and when they become an issue. But I was surprised to hear you earlier this month say that sometimes these days it's difficult to find potholes in Penarth. I disagree with that, and I think a lot of residents of Plymouth Ward that I represent would as well. By some distance, potholes and the state of the roads and pavements is the biggest thing that people speak to me about during the campaign and afterwards.
Councillor Thomas, can I just, sorry, forgive me, do you have a question? Thank you.
Yeah, I do. I've just come into it. So the council report that identified only one road in need of resurfacing is disappointing. So I'd like to ask why it appears that the people of Penarth are low on the priority list for the council. And I'd also like to extend an invite to you to come around Plymouth Ward and speak to residents and see if they share your beliefs that potholes aren't very common in Penarth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. It might interest you to know that actually I walk frequently around Plymouth Ward, partially for exercise, partially because I care for an elderly Plymouth Ward resident. And so I am frequently either cycling or walking in that ward. It was interesting because when this came up, I thought I'd have a little look at some of my own figures because, you know, I did make that comment. I'd have to check if I said difficult, but in a recent walk, which was about an hour long round my ward, I only spotted 3 potholes in an hour's walk, all of which had been marked up in yellow and all of which have subsequently been filled. And I'm not a stranger to reporting potholes. I actually looked back in some emails, so I can't say that this is the complete figure, but in 2017 Lavnott Road was a bit of an issue, so a lot of my emails were around that. In 2018 most of my pothole reports were around Cornswell Road, Barron Road and Redlands Road. In fact, in 2019 I actually reported 132 defects in Cornswell Road, and I was delighted that subsequently that road was resurfaced because it was in a bit of a state. In 2020 weren't so many. It was I can only find 5 reports in Cornswell Road and Redlands Road, but in 2021 I actually reported 47 potholes in Lavnott Road, Archer Road, Victoria Road and Stanwell Road. Add to that bus junctions, where they break down when they're turning corners. We have to keep an eye on those, and active travel routes are a particular issue. Add to that the photographs that I can share of full bins, pavements, streetlights, graffiti, etc. And I think it starts to become evident that, as far as I'm concerned, that not only is a councillor the community's voice in the council, but an effective councillor is the council's eyes in the community. That's what I do. There is a portal, there is a website that if you'd like to go for walks around your own ward, you can report potholes. And I can assure you that in with the criteria that was fully discussed in Economy, Environment and Regeneration Committee the other day, if they meet those criteria, they will be filled, and they will be filled quickly. Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Question from Councillor Bruce. Question from Councillor Bruce concerning school transport provision, and can I ask Councillor Brooks to respond, please?
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Bruce. Free home to school transport is provided to secondary age pupils who live 3 or more miles from their catchment school. Transport is provided for any pupil who qualifies either on distance grounds or because they do not have an available walking route to school if they attend their catchment area school. This is and has been the authority's position and is part of the school and college transport policy, which can be found on the Council's website if anybody would like to refer to that. Pupils moving up from Roos Primary to Cowbridge Comprehensive in September 2022 will be allocated free school transport as long as they live in the catchment. Then parents are able to apply to any school they wish, but as outlined in the policy, if it is a non-catchment, parents, carers will be responsible for transport provision. The change of catchment for Cowbridge Comprehensive, and that included Roos moving into catchment, was, as other changes in school catchments has been a phased approach. The change came in for Year 7 in September 2021 and will be for both Year 7 and Year 8 in September 2022. The Council does not change the catchment for all year groups at the same time. If that was to happen, and in this particular case, then all pupils who attended Lantwick Major Comprehensive and live in Roos would be all out of catchment and not qualify for free school transport. That would affect close to 230 pupils who live in the Roos area and who knowingly choose to attend at that time their catchment school being Lantwick Comprehensive. Therefore, the Council has fulfilled its statutory duty and continues to provide transport for pupils who attend their catchment school. Thank you, Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Moving on to a question from Councillor Franks concerning additional tax burden, and can I ask the leader to respond, please?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Franks. Yes, this is about the additional tax burden falling on Vale Glamorgan from the increase in national insurance contributions. The direct impact of national insurance increase in 2022-23 was calculated as part of the budget proposals and to be 1.034 million, and this figure includes all schools. In terms of the indirect impact on, for instance, social care providers, we haven't been able to put a figure on this as we don't have sufficient detail on our suppliers' pay and the increases to social care providers for 2022-23, which would reflect and the increase would reflect the real living wage increase and other inflationary impacts such as energy costs.
Thank you, Mayor. For your convenience, could you note I'd like to ask supplementaries on all my questions. So with your permission, I'll ask the first supplementary. This additional burden on the council and therefore the council taxpayer is quite shocking in the Vale alone. And to me, it shows the incompetence of the UK government. And I would say Wales cannot afford this level of financial irresponsibility. But I'll move on from that. Can you give an assurance that all frontline services operated by the Vale of Glamorgan will be protected by the council in the face of increased national insurance contributions?
I must be honest, Councillor Franks, I'm not sure the full level, the question you're actually asking. I mean, we have budgeted for this year. Those that were present in the budget setting last year, we actually specifically referred to approximately £1 million additional costs that were going to come to us as a result of the national insurance increases. So for this year, that's fine. Last year, we had, when we started planning the budget, we had a 24 million gap to deal with, and we were very fortunate that there was a good settlement from Welsh Government. We don't know what that's going to be. We're being told it's not going to be anything like that level this year. It won't be too long before we start going into the budget setting process again for next year. And this year, we've got inflation on top of national insurance, on top of energy charges, on top of everything else. It doesn't make for good reading. But what I will do is we will make sure that we do all that is humanly possible to protect our services. And that will start with our most vulnerable.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Before we move on to your next question.
Actually, could I just interject, Mayor, if possible? I need to make one clarification on a question I was asked earlier about the Levelling Up fund, and I have been informed that late on Friday night the portal for the Levelling Up fund actually did open, and it will close on the 2nd of August. So our bid will be submitted during that time frame. Sorry to interrupt, but I didn't want to leave council without the correct details.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Franks, before we move on to your next question, just to be clear, obviously supplementary questions are available to councillors once they've heard the responses that Cabinet members give to them. So can I respectfully ask you to indicate to me if you do want to raise a supplementary once you've actually heard the response from Cabinet members, rather than taking them on block? Thank you.
All right, I'll certainly do everything I can to cooperate with you.
Thank you,
but there
Councillor
has
Franks.
been a little bit of miscommunication. So poor old George tried his very best to be helpful, and it cut the flow of the debate. So
well, thank you for your point, Councillor Franks. I'm going to move us on. I think Councillor Carroll managed to ask his supplementary very well, and I think the leader was able to give a response without that misunderstanding causing any significant impact. So we'll move on to the next question, which is from Councillor Franks concerning road safety in Dinas Powys, and I'll ask Councillor Brooks to respond, please.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Franks. Now, the question that you've asked doesn't actually provide any specific details relating to your road safety concerns, so it's therefore difficult to me to respond specifically. So I'll try and give you a bit of a broad broad response to your question. The Council receives numerous concerns regarding a variety of aspects relating to road safety throughout the Vale, and investigates those concerns as appropriate and as far as reasonably practical, given the current resource available and its current powers and responsibilities. I would firstly clarify that the Council, as local highway authority, has a statutory duty under Section 39 of the Road Traffic Act 1988 to undertake studies into road traffic collisions and to take steps both to reduce and prevent them as far as is reasonably practical and appropriate. To carry out this duty, the Council reviews collision data provided by the Welsh Government on a 6-monthly basis, and this relates to injury collisions which have occurred within the Vale's local highway network, and considers the evidence and potential contributory factors associated with those collisions. Where necessary, based on this analysis and the potential cause of any collision, the Council will consider schemes to improve road safety subject to available funding. This includes Dinas Powys. However, I am unaware of any serious injury collision within the village which requires any specific and immediate consideration at this time. There is quite often some confusion over responsibilities with regard to highway safety matters and speed related issues. Although the council sets speed limits, the primary responsibility for speed enforcement rests with the police, and the council has no powers to deal with speeding offences. For this reason, we recommend that contacting South Wales Police should always be the first line of approach taken by members of the public who are concerned about speeding issues in their local area. Alternatively, residents can make a request for speed camera enforcement direct with GoSafe, the Wales Casualty Reduction Partnership, whose primary function is to make Welsh roads safer by reducing road casualties. However, the council, police and GoSafe will generally recommend residents consider the setting up of a community speed watch scheme, and where these have been set up, they've proven to be helpful to deterring speeding in local areas throughout Wales, and of which there are many examples throughout the Vale, and those details can be found on the GoSafe website. In exceptional circumstances where there's a significant history of personal injury collisions and where the police and or GoSafe action has failed to reduce speeding offences and improve road safety, the council will consider introducing further measures to assist with speed enforcement, such as traffic calming. Such measures are expensive to introduce, and where further measures are considered necessary, then these schemes compete for limited Welsh Government grant funding, where in most, if not all cases, the most severe occasions are awarded the funding, which I'm sure you can understand is about that priority. The council has currently accumulated a significant number of schemes that are awaiting future funding. Finally, and I'm just going to bang my drum again about the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. You will also be aware of the Welsh Government proposal for the introduction of 20-mile-an-hour speeding limits in Wales, following the issue of advice on the 12th of July 2022 by the Head of Neighbourhood Services and Transport. The Senedd also voted on and approved the proposal to reduce the default speed limit from 30 mile an hour to 20 mile an hour on restricted roads and residential streets on the 12th of July 2022. Council officers are currently working through the requirements of the legislation to understand the implications within the Vale and which roads will be impacted after having successfully taken part in one of the 8 Welsh Government pilots for the 20 mile an hour default speed in St Bride's Major. The default speed limit, as I've already said in previous responses, is due to be implemented in September 2023. And this measure would hopefully address ongoing road safety concerns related to speed, not only in Dinas Powys, but throughout the Vale, where the limit is to be implemented. Now, obviously, we're at the very start of that piece of work, and we have got a way to go to the introduction of that. But I do anticipate that the council will be able to provide further details on the implications for individual areas in the autumn of this year, and that's what I'm hoping for there. Thank you, Councillor Franks.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks, for that comprehensive response. Councillor Franks, having heard that comprehensive response, do you have a supplementary?
You'll be shocked to hear, yes, I do. I would say across the whole of Dinas Powys, there are serious traffic issues that need addressing, and there's a lack of policing, enforcement and safety schemes. Now, I take Councillor Brooks's comments about who's responsible for what, but basically there's a whole series of problems. We're often offered a camera watch scheme, but it's been impossible to engage with the authorities to try to get one set up. We've got the volunteers to do it, but it's been impossible. And I'm sure most members will be aware that the main road through Dinas Powys alternates between being excessively overcrowded to, and other times, being a racetrack.
Forgive me, Councillor. Forgive me, Councillor Vice. Can I ask if you're moving to a question, please?
Yeah, the question is, thank you, Mayor. The question is, Councillor, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I think Councillor Franks have actually just laid out the measures that the council are undertaking, and I do anticipate that the work that we're doing around the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and also around active travel, which again there's and the bus service white paper. I do think all of these measures will help in that situation, and I know this is something that's been discussed at the WLGA, the Welsh Local Government Association, and I've attended meetings and briefings, as well as I know our officers as well. So I think this is a much bigger piece of work than that question that I can possibly answer there, but I do believe that we are taking some serious steps towards helping traffic on the road and road safety, and as I said, the police do have an important role within that as well. So thank you, Councillor Franks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Next question from Councillor Franks concerning flooding plan events. Question for Councillor Wilson to respond to, please. Councillor Wilson, can I check if you're with us, or do you still have a connection?
Yeah, apologies, I was muted.
No, that's fine.
I will go back to the beginning. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Franks. The Council Civil Protection Unit operates a 24/7, 365-day duty officer system to respond to emergencies. The CPU works with other service areas to respond, and is necessary will open an emergency control room, usually based at the Alps in Wenvo. In the event of a flooding emergency, officers will contact the Social Services Emergency Duty Team to ascertain if there are any known vulnerable residents in the area, but it should be noted these will only be if they are social services clients. Welsh Government are working on a system called Jigsaw, which is a web service that allows the user to be able to search a specific area of a map and identify the properties within which are vulnerable citizens which may require assistance during an emergency, such as a flooding, snowfall, or perhaps an area being affected by smoke. For example, the user can draw a circle or polygons around an area and within a matter of minutes be able to identify which houses require assistance. This will allow vulnerable citizens to receive priority assistance to prepare for an emergency incident, receiving additional support as a result of an event, e.g. water bottles, or evacuate if required. In the case of Storm Vale in 2020, to obtain data on which properties required assistance took some time. With Jigsaw, this information can be obtained in a couple of minutes. The maps can also be changed, i.e. a black and white map just showing the outlines, or perhaps a satellite map similar to Google Earth, but in more detail, can be selected. The system, which is unique to the UK, now means the data is now available within minutes, detailing the most vulnerable citizens in our communities so they can be supported when an incident occurs. In addition, the CPU has produced a new community floodplain plan and extreme weather guidance that explains how to prepare a community flood plan. This plan can be completed by households and a community or flood group. This can help communities develop local level plans that will assist local communities and groups to identify and prepare plans for any vulnerable residents within their local community who may need extra assistance. Guidance can be found on the council's website, where you also find further information and guidance for residents and businesses on what to do before, during and after a flooding event.
Councillor Franks.
Thank you. You're very kind. On the day of the dreadful flooding in Dinas Powys, just before Christmas, Dinas Powys residents received next to no assistance from the Vale Council. Vulnerable residents were left in flooded houses, and it was only their neighbours and the fire service that offered assistance. And trying to understand the answer from Councillor Wilson, it seems that that situation would happen again if there was flooding in the next couple of months. Personally, I do not think this is acceptable. And my question is, will you reconsider the level of support that is available to vulnerable residents?
Thank you very much for your supplementary question. I disagree with the amount of work that we did at that time. although I wasn't a cabinet member, as you know, I was a member of the council, and I know that the Vale officers went above and beyond what they would do in such an event. And I've had a good account from officers since being in the administration. So I disagree. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from Councillor Janice Charles concerns waste recycling targets. And can I invite Councillor Wilson to respond, please?
Thank you very much for your question. The last measured recycling and minimum local authority recover, recycling, preparation, reuse and composting target was 64%, and that was in 2019-2020. The council had to achieve a recycling rate of 64% in this target year, and they're up to 23-24. During the target year of 2019-20, the council recorded a recycling rate of 70.3, exceeding the statutory target. The next measured target will be 70% by 24-25. At present, the council continues to exceed the statutory targets, and it's currently seen the second highest performing council in Wales, and on target to achieve and exceed the 24 and 25 target.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Can I have a supplementary, please?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cabinet Member Councillor Wilson. Given the current emergencies, are you able to tell us the level of greenhouse gas emissions reduction that this level of recycling and reuse has achieved, and what potential further savings can be made from increasing recycling and reuse rates further? Thank you.
Forgive me interjecting. I think there's probably two questions there, Councillor Charles. So can I ask which question you'd like to put to Councillor Wilson, and perhaps you could pick up the subsequent question outside of the meeting with the Cabinet member?
I would like to ask the question, given the current emergency, that can you actually make more savings from increasing recycling and reuse rates further?
All right, thank you very much. I think we have got great plans to actually achieve that through, not only have we got a waste transfer station in Cowbridge, which I urge you to visit, and other members, if you get the opportunity, which I had the opportunity to visit, but also we're going to get a fantastic one in the Atlantic Trading Estate next year. So watch this space.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and thank you for understanding, Councillor Charles. Do please pick up the other issue with the Cabinet member outside of meeting if you want to do that. And final question from elected members from Councillor Champion concerns recycling waste bins in public spaces. And again, can I ask Councillor Wilson to respond, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Champion. There are no immediate plans to provide separate recycling bins for town and rural litter, as previous trials affected recycling quality and increased contamination levels due to poor compliance by users with various separate recycling compartments. However, when the council new recycling plant opens next year, there will be a greater service flexibility for further trials and hopefully improved compliance due to there being a greater awareness now amongst residents and visitors of the need to effectively recyclable waste. We will therefore plan to undertake such further work in this area during 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Champion. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. I can't understand why it's such an issue that we haven't got any in the Vale when other councils have them.
I'm sorry, was there a question there?
Yeah, so the question is, why doesn't the Vale have them when other councils do?
I think I have already answered that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We now move on to item 9 on the agenda, questions from the public. We have 7 questions before us tonight. I'm going to paraphrase the questions, but councillors have the full questions from members of the public before them, and they'll respond on the basis of those full questions. So question 1 is from Mrs. Sian Woodfield, and it concerns sewage in Watchtower Bay and the council's plans to address concerns. Thank you for your question, Mrs. Woodfield. Can I invite the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services, Councillor Wilson, to respond, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Woodfield, for your question. The council has no jurisdiction regarding the operation of sewage treatment plants or sewage pumping plants when intended to Watchtower Bay. The responsibility lies with Dye Cymru Welsh Water, and their operations are regulated by Natural Resources Wales, or NRW, under environmental permits with prescribed specific limits on certain environmental discharges. There will be occasions where unplanned discharges from combined sewers outfalls can occur, and such discharges are investigated by NRW. And depending upon the reasons for the breach, enforcement action can follow. A recent occurrence in May is being actually investigated, and we have been informed that such spillage was a result of poor power supply issues on one of DCWW sewage plants pumping stations. The council understands that DCWW is actually assessing future investment in upgrading the Barry Town sewage pumping station to ensure future spillages are prevented. That's assisting the improvement of water quality at Watchtower Bay. Regardless of the fact that the responsibility for operating of pumping stations does not lie with the council, we're also very concerned about the impact of discharges in an area that is regularly being used for bathing. As a consequence, officers from the council share regulatory services are working with local water user groups to gather appropriate information stroke evidence in order that an application can be made to the Welsh Government to consider the designation of Watchtower Bay as a bathing water beach. Should the application be successful, this will ensure that ongoing water quality monitoring is undertaken by NRW during the bathing water season.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Next question from Ms Sue White concerns the publication of Welsh Government's requirements regarding surface water runoffs and permeable or porous materials, the application of those requirements in relation to new planning applications and the enforcement of the requirements. And can I ask Councillor Sivinyanam to respond, please? Thank you. You're on mute, Councillor.
I do apologise. I'm so sorry. It's a bit late now, isn't it? So thank you, Mayor, for that summary. That was very helpful, and thank you, Sue White, for your question. The first part of Sue White's question gives the background that the sort of legal requirement for the use of permeable materials or direct runoff to a permeable area, and that is to be found in the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order of 1995, and this requirement must be met in order for new hard surface to be permitted development. And permitted development, for those who don't know, is a development that doesn't require planning permission. But where there's a new hard surface which forms part of a large development which does require planning permission, the council will, in many cases, impose a condition to require the new area of hard surface to be in keeping with the criteria from the Town and Country Planning Order. As far as enforcement is concerned, each development has to be assessed on its own merits, and for this reason the council can't take a blanket approach that any non-compliant examples will automatically be subject to enforcement action. But of course, where there are planning conditions which require permeable surfaces, any reported breach will be investigated by the planning enforcement team, and enforcement action may follow if the matter's not rectified. So I do hope that answers Sue White's question, but please, Sue White, please do contact me directly if you feel that I haven't covered everything. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sivinyanam. Next question is from Mrs Linford Davis, and it concerns what's being done to address the need, and I think it need your inverted commas, Mrs Davis, to release effluent into rivers and bathing beaches, and whether anything is being addressed with regards to water treatment on new housing estates. And can I invite Councillor Wilson to respond, please?
Thank you, Mrs Davis, for your question. Natural Resources Wales is responsible for regulating water quality and the permitting of DCWW storm overflows from the Vale sewer network. New housing developments in Wales are required to comply with statutory standards for sustainable drainage systems, also known as SUDs, with a discharge hierarchy favouring the reuse, infiltration or discharge of surface water to local water courses before disposal to the DCWW foul or combined sewage network would be considered. The SUDS standards require separated surface water and foul drainage networks on site, and only if all possible alternatives were exhausted would disposable surface water and combined sewer be accepted. Any surface water stormed flows into DCWW combined network will be controlled to a flow agreed by DCWW, with additional surface water storage on site to hold water temporarily. This scenario is more likely to occur on smaller infill developments in urbanised areas served by older combined sewer networks conveying both sewage and rainwater. For such standards also require the treatment of surface water one-off, depending upon the proposed use of development to protect receiving water bodies. New development has potential to place increased pressure on DCWW's existing network, and developments connecting additional foul flows are consulted upon and conditioned through the planning process, while surface water connections are consulted on and controlled through the SUDS approval process. DCWW are currently developing a drainage and wastewater management plan, which will consider the key challenges of population growth, urban creep and climate change on their network.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And the next question is from Mr. Tim McKinney. And Mr. McKinney, I understand you're with us tonight. You'd like to ask the question in person. Thank you for your patience. Would you like to ask your question, Mr. McKinney?
I've enjoyed it immensely. It's been quite an education. Just since submitting my question in May 19th, I've since been in touch with Sarah Jones, the street activities person, and with Christopher Edwards, the town city development. My question is as a member of the public, we would love to see our activities back on King Square with the market. And I understand a tender was to be given, which was promised July 4th, but yet we have still yet to find out when that will be. Would like to reinstate it as a public member and also put in family-friendly activities, which would include the whole of Holton Road to get people to come in those businesses as well as on our King Square. So my question is, how can we move this forward in order to get activity before our summer is over? All the best.
Thank you, Mr. McKinney. I think the core question regards the position of the market at King Square. I understand that you're suggesting a series of activities might arise around that. I think the question before council is about the position of the market, and I'll ask the leader to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. McKinney. Yes, the answer is in response to the question as was posed. And first of all, I have to say the council was disappointed to hear that the previous market operator had chosen to close the weekly market, but understands the reasoning behind the decision, as it's been a very challenging economic period for town centres. A new invitation to tender will commence in July, we're still in July, which plans to widen the scope of opportunities in and around King Square for any operator. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. McKinney, for your question. And then we move on to a question for Mrs. Andrea Lane, which concerns dropped curbs and what is being done in relation to the requirement of fitting them and reassessing them. And can I ask Councillor Wilson to respond, please?
Thank you very much for your question, Mrs. Lane. Drop curbs are essentially footways that have been lowered to the level of the carriageway or road, and there are essentially two types. Those for pedestrians, wheelchairs and pushchairs, which are often installed using tactile surfaces, and those installed outside private driveways and access for motor vehicles access it across the public footway. The council installs drop curves on footways in specific locations to provide better access for pedestrians, and wheelchair use to provide greater accessibility to shops, medical facilities and general amenities. If anyone is suffering footway access issues, they can request a drop curve by contacting the council either online or via our contact centre.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We move on to a question from Dr. Alexander Barrett, which concerns what the council estimates the level of surplus places at South Point Primary School will be in 5 years. And can I ask Councillor Birch to respond, please?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Barrett. At the last council meeting, it was noted that South Point Primary School currently has 60% surplus primary places. Over the next 5 years, this is expected to fall to 14% surplus, provided there is increased demand for 98 places, resulting from 354 newly constructed houses to the northeast of the railway line in Roos. However, the developer has submitted alternative plans for only 256 new houses to the northeast of the railway line, of which 10 are expected to be single bedroom and unlikely to demand. Am I reading the question? I am reading the question, aren't I? I apologise. The council has received a planning application for the final phase of the housing allocation known as Land North of the Railway Line Roos. This application is currently in the process of being validated by the council's planning department and has not yet been published publicly on the council's planning register. However, I can clarify the application has been submitted for 262 dwellings, of which 10 are proposed to be one-bedroom units. Excluding the 10 one-bed dwellings, the pupil yield calculation would result in an increase in demand in the area of an estimated 70 places for primary-age children, compared with 98 places for a 354 dwelling development as previously anticipated. Based on the pupil yield using the recently submitted application dwelling numbers, this would result in a predicted future surplus of 27% at South Point Primary School over a 5-year period, compared with 14% for the larger development. However, as noted, this application has only recently been submitted and the density of the development may change as no determination on the proposal has been made at this time. Following the completion of the current housing development and the positive impact that a new school building brings to an area, we would expect to see an increase in school admissions year on year, over and above those generated by further housing development. We have already seen an increase in children transferring to the school since it became operational on its new site.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. And a final question from members of the public is again from Dr. Alexander Barrett, and it concerns the level of demand for English medium primary places from the housing development to the northwest of the railway line in Roos, and whether it's time to review the council's modelling assumptions to prevent excessive surplus places in new schools in the future. And again, can I ask Councillor Birch to respond, please?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Barrett. Although a planning application has recently been received for 262 dwellings on the remaining housing allocation, known as Land North of the Railway Line, no decision has been made by the local planning authority on whether to approve the application. The council's planning officers will need to assess whether the proposal is appropriate against national and local planning policy, particularly in terms of the proposed density for the site, as the proposal is currently providing less than expected under policy MG2 housing allocations and policy MD6 housing densities. The council will need to consider whether there are appropriate reasons for why fewer dwellings are being pursued. Therefore, it is too early to confirm that the housing allocation will deliver less primary school places than anticipated. Additionally, the council needs to make decisions based upon the best available information at the time. Regarding the decision to move Llancarvan Primary School, the proposed development was predicted to deliver 700 houses. This was based on information submitted by the developer when the site was allocated in the local development plan. Consequently, the number of dwellings allocated was considered to be a robust figure and was subsequently used in the council's calculations. The pupil yield factor from housing developments in the Vale of Glamorgan is comparable to the methodology employed by other local authorities and is dependent upon the demography of the council area. The council's methodology for calculating pupil yield from housing developments and pupil projections is consistent, and the council is satisfied it reflects current conditions for school place planning purposes. For example, the council's projection of the pupil yield from the current housing development was 131, compared with a pupil yield to date of 116. The latest residential units under phase 1 of the development were completed in 2022. As a result, the full cohort of children is not yet fully reflected in school admissions. It is worth noting that the formula used to calculate pupil places arising from housing developments was based on census data from 2011, as this was the most up-to-date information at the time of the assessment. However, early data from the 2021 census has now been published. The council will be using the new statistical information from the 2021 census to update its planning obligation formula for education provision.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. We move on now to item 10, any urgent items under part 1. I'm sure you'll all be pleased to hear that I don't have any. There are no urgent items under part 2, so it just remains for me to thank everyone for their attendance on this extraordinarily hot evening, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night, all. Well done, Chair.
Good night, all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.